Good evening, everyone, and apologies for a slightly late start, but it was good to catch up with a few people before we began the meeting tonight. I'm just going to go around by doing a few notices, and then we're going to introduce ourselves because we haven't got any name badges in front of us. We normally have these great big name things, so you know who we are. But so I'll just introduce myself. So I'm Councillor Pippa Connor. I chair the Adults and Health Scrutiny panel. And these are my colleagues sitting around the table, but I'll just go through a few notices I need to do before we start. That's filming at meetings. This meeting is being webcast, so it can go out and you can click online to see it. So if anyone is concerned about being captured on film or doesn't want to be filmed, then where is the filming? Does it go up as far as the people at the back, Mike?
It can do.
It can do. So just to be aware that, you might be, well, you would be, and especially if you come up to speak later. So just be aware of that. Any apologies for absence?
I have not received any apologies for absence.
Any items of urgent business?
There are no items of urgent business.
Declarations of interest from the panel members. I always declare my sister's GP in Tottenham, and I'm a member of the RCN. Anyone else? No? Okay. Depositions, petitions, presentations and questions?
None have been received for this meeting.
Right, well, I'll just go around the table then to carry on the introductions so we all know who we are. So I've introduced myself. I'll hand over to Mike.
I'm Michael Kay, Democratic Services and Scrutiny Manager.
Councillor Gina Adamu, member of this panel.
And I'm Councillor David Beecham, and I'm also a member of this panel.
I'm Helena Carnier. I'm a co-optee on this panel.
Councillor Patrick Berryman, a member of the panel.
Zena Brabson and Councillor Haringey Ward. I'm not a member of this panel, but I'm interested in the issues here, so I've come to the meeting. So I've asked Chair if I can sit at the table, and she said yes. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Margaret Lyons from the Care Quality Commission.
Good evening, I'm Adi Cooper. I'm the Independent Chair of the Safeguarding Adults Board, Haringey.
Good evening, I'm Beverly Tarker, Director for Adult Social Services in Haringey.
I'm Councillor Bernice Vanier, Cabinet Member for Adult Social Care and Culture.
Hello, I'm Charlotte Pomley, Assistant Director for Commissioning at the Council.
Right, thank you. So just to go through minutes. So approve the minutes of the Adults and Health Scrutiny Panel meeting held on the 16th of November. Anyone have any issues with the minutes? Minutes for the 14th of December? Okay, right. Well, as we've got lots of guests with us this evening, family, etc., normally we would have taken you first, but I'm very sorry, Dr. Cooper has to leave due to sort of other reasons outside of her control. So we are going to take the safeguarding part first, which was the first on the agenda item anyway, and then we'll go straight over to Osborne Grove. So just to let you know that that's how we're going to proceed. So we're going straight on to item 8, Safeguarding Adults Board. Is it Charlotte? Are you starting?
I just wanted to highlight, and we have prepared a presentation which we can get up if necessary. Thought we had a bit of time. But just to set out that for the Safeguarding Adults Board, which in Haringey is a genuinely multi-agency partnership, we have developed a multi-agency framework for performance, which picks up the contributions not just of the local authority, particularly to its adult social care functions, but of the police, of the clinical commissioning group, the CCG, and other NHS trusts in the area. And it's a framework that we're developing through the Safeguarding Adult Board. It remains work in progress, but we have been seeking to identify all the various issues which affect vulnerable adults, adults who are vulnerable to abuse. So I will make sure, sorry, I'd forgotten that Michael was here, not Christian, I'm so sorry. I'm forwarding it to you, Michael. and then we can hopefully just get it on the screen for you. So just to talk through in a bit more detail as that's coming up. So as I say, this is a generally multi-agency framework. It's the first time we've really developed this using all partners' information. We've previously presented information to the Safeguarding Adults Board, which is focused on the activities within the safeguarding team within Adult Social Services. And basically, we have been working to make sure this is, as I say, across partners. What we've tried to do is identify all the safeguarding concerns that have been raised through the year to December 2017, and what we see is that the majority of concerns that have been raised, which are received by the Council, where there aren't actually any safeguarding issues, but we do have concerns that have been raised, were from the police. And these are generally from things called Merlin reports, which basically identify where police come across someone they feel they have concerns about, and usually the main recourse for support is to the Council. What we've been working on particularly, and Adi will bring this out in the report, is making sure that where safeguarding concerns are identified, that we're working with those individuals who've raised the concerns, whether that's the user themselves or the person affected by the abuse or those in their networks, to identify what the outcomes we're looking for from safeguarding are, and to see what progress we need to see through this work. We have a small number of overall concerns which progress to a section 42, but that sort of underplays in a way the amount of work that goes into supporting individuals who do raise a concern. So whilst we have a number of section 42 investigations which haven't been completed, we have a number that have worked through and the issues are resolved along the way before they become a section 42 inquiry. I just wanted to move to that slide. So this is the primary reason for safeguarding concerns being raised. So we can see that over the year, the highest level of concerns about type of abuse were emotional and psychological abuse, and that is followed by physical abuse and financial abuse. We have seen an increase over the quarters of the year in sexual abuse, although that is lower overall than the figures for emotional and physical abuse. We're also picking up increasing levels of neglect and self-neglect across the year. We also have, moving on to the next slide, some specific issues around safeguarding issues triggered by pressure ulcers. Whilst these aren't as common in this year as they were in the last year, it's still a major cause for concern that some individuals who are likely to be vulnerable are having safeguarding concerns raised because pressure ulcers have not been responded to adequately across the system. We have also been looking through this framework at the level of training which we see in the people working with vulnerable adults across the piece. And what these next slides show is the levels of safeguarding training at the Whittington and North Middlesex University Hospital. And basically, whilst we have very high levels of training, we're aware that there are quite high levels of staff turnover, so we're constantly concerned to make sure that training does take place for new staff coming into the system. We also look at figures around the timeliness of our protection plans. Whilst we do have some outstanding, we're generally responding in a timely fashion to protection plans being in place. We also have a series of surveys which we're trying to do with service users. This is quite a difficult process to get into the detail at the time when somebody's in crisis or comes through with a concern. But we've got a small number that have been allocated. So what we're working on now is trying to get a larger survey of people who've been through the safeguarding process to see whether the outcome is that they feel safer after having raised a concern and having their issues dealt with. So to get some direct user feedback on this picture. We then look at some police data. And what we'll see here is a picture which many people will be familiar with, that Haringey has very high levels of reported domestic violence, domestic abuse. We know, for example, for children's services, it's a factor in up to 70% of all cases referred into children's social care. And we see these figures reflected here on the Safeguarding Adult Board. So I think it's an important issue that we keep track of. We have a Violence Against Women and Girls strategic group. We have a number of support groups into that, and we work very closely between the Safeguarding Adult Board and the equivalent on the children's side, which is the LSCB, the Local Safeguarding Children's Board. We then come on to information about deprivation of liberty, safeguards. This is a complex area with complex legislation, but basically what we're trying to do is ensure that we respond in a timely fashion to all DOLS inquiries in the authority. We have previously had some areas of backlog. These have now been worked through, and with additional resources put in, we have ensured that DOLS are responded, deprivation of liberty safeguards are responded to in a timely fashion. We then moved on to the impact of our work. Basically, what we'd wanted to see was that the interventions that we do have an impact in terms of removing the risk, safeguarding risks. And basically, the vast majority of cases did have the risk either removed or reduced. It's not always possible to completely remove the risk, but that there are cases where we considered as an authority that the risk remained, but that and the main reason given for that is that the client wanted the case to be closed and felt that sufficient had been done and didn't want further action to be taken. But obviously that would mean that we would be monitoring that. In terms of outcomes for the person at risk, I think we can see here that once the outcome had been dealt with, there was no follow-on action. So usually we have managed, in the majority of cases, we managed to close down the case. Some clients, as I said earlier, we keep an increased level of monitoring over where we still have concerns that that person is vulnerable to further risk. And we look as well at the outcomes for the organisation, which mostly results in no further action for the organisation, that the work carried out by the safeguarding team with colleagues across other organisations and within the council is adequate. We also looked at, we keep an eye on the quality of care homes across the borough, and not just care homes but home care establishments as well. And I think Margaret will be picking this up in her presentation. And basically, as a board, we monitor these at every meeting, and we also have a quality assurance subgroup to the Safeguarding Adult Board, which works to identify across the CCG and the local authority those homes or home care agencies which require improvement and require some additional work to be done. And coming on to the final slides, this is an area of which we call for shorthand MSP. It's making safeguarding personal. And that's really very much the focus of our work. So while there's a lot of activity that happens, what we're really trying to do is respond to the things that people say they want to see different in their lives as a result of a safeguarding intervention. So what we've increased significantly is the proportion of people who are now directly asked about those outcomes and where those outcomes are recorded. That's something where we have improved as an authority quite significantly, as you can see in that slide. We're glad to say that a number of those have had their outcomes fully met, which is a positive result. I think we've got more work to do to make sure that the identification of those outcomes is sharp enough and that we're effective enough in our responses. And finally, we just wanted to pull out from our adult social care survey information how service users feel about the services that they receive. Now, this is quite a complicated graph to see at this level, but Haringey's performance is the sort of light orange one at the top. I'm glad to say. 89.2% of people said that the services they receive help to make them feel safe and secure, which is positive. So we're above our comparator boroughs, London and England. And what we're aiming to do is maintain that high level of security and safety that people feel in their services. So that is a quick run through. I think what I really wanted to highlight is there's quite a range of information that we cover. As I say, that is because the board, under the chairwomanship of AD, is really an effective partnership vehicle for ensuring that safeguarding is picked up across the borough. And I just wanted to flag, for example, that at the last meeting we had a presentation on modern-day slavery, for example. So we're picking up a number of areas of potential abuse and safeguarding issues, which are not necessarily what one would consider, but really trying to pick up a whole borough-type approach to some of the issues that are raised.
Right, thank you very much. That was a very quick whiz through. I made points, questions as you went through those, so I'm going to go back to those. So I don't know if, Helena, you'd like to start off with that. I'd like it if we could start reasonably near the beginning of the presentation and work our way through. Thank you.
I'm not sure where it was. Training. I really think that for clarity, you should be putting what the target is, and in that training, both of those training levels are supposed to be mandatory and therefore should be 100%, and neither of them are 100%. In fact, for level 2, you're getting 1 out of 5 that's not trained at all. I think what I'm saying is that if you want somebody to understand these figures, you need to say what the target is, the fact it's mandatory, and therefore it actually shows it as a weakness.
Thank you. We can add that to the presentation. I think it is a reflection of the turnover in staffing levels that we're seeing, not just in those hospital settings, but across all care settings. But yeah, absolutely, it would be reasonable to put the target in. We can add that in.
Thank you. I'm not sure where I read it in all these papers on safeguarding, but as I understand, some of the cases remain open. And my question is, who is responsible to monitor those cases that they do remain open? And I'm aware that the safeguarding team, the social workers, is very small. It's not what it used to be, a whole, almost whole structure of it. So who has the responsibility? Is this those 2 or 3 safeguarding social workers, or are they in general the social workers who deal with the cases? That's one area I wanted to ask. And the other one, I don't know if you're the right person to ask on this.
I don't know. So we can ask the question and then we can ask Adi afterwards.
The chair only just gave us this a few minutes ago, so I haven't read it in great detail. But what I have read, it really concerns me, is for children, safeguarding children. And the question I have is this going to the scrutiny panel for children's services to examine it throughout, or do we have the responsibility here? I mean, from what I read, and I only read 2 pages, is very concerning what I read here. I think I would go as far as say it's a failure of the service to the vulnerable children. So perhaps somebody can say what they intend to do about this. Thank you.
Just come back to Charlotte. Have you seen this? Okay, you have. That's fine.
Okay, so just for clarity, so Councillor Adamu is referring to the letter published last week following the joint targeted area inspection with a focus on neglect in Haringey. So it's called a joint targeted area inspection because it involves a number of inspectorates, so the CQC, the Care Quality Commission, who are around this table tonight, various wings of Ofsted, Her Majesty's Constabulary Inspectorate, the Inspectorate responsible for probation, and probably a couple of others. fire and rescue as well. So it is, it's a genuinely, again, multi-agency partnership inspection of neglect. The letter has been published. The requirement is on the partnership locally to respond with an action plan, and work is underway to do that through the local Safeguarding Children's Board, the LSCB. So there will be a response. I don't have knowledge about whether it is going to the Children and Young People Scrutiny panel, but I would imagine that it has been taken there. If other members have information, that's fine, but I'm not aware of whether it has yet been there. But as I say, it was a focused look at neglect and how it affects families in the borough. Coming back to your other questions, so I think Beverly will have more detail about the structure of the team and how it...
Thank you for your question. We've gone through some sort of developments within the adult sort of safeguarding structure and organisation, and you're quite right. We've always had a discrete safeguarding team. Following the CARE Act, we did a review and we acknowledged that there was a need to make sure that safeguarding was everybody's business, and actually locating safeguarding responses discreetly within one team would not deliver the outcomes we were looking for. So it was a real push to support all social workers, all practitioners, to be able to be trained up to actually respond to safeguarding inquiries. And that's what we've done. We've still retained a small team, which largely works in an advisory capacity. It supports complex cases. It monitors response to deprivation of liberty safeguards. So it's a sort of a coordinating structure, but really we've supported all our practitioners to be able to respond to safeguarding concerns.
Chair, if I may, the cases which remain open, who has responsibility to make sure they're not forgotten?
So the safeguarding team has that overview and coordination of all open cases. So there's an audit regularly to make sure that the cases that do remain open are open for a valid reason, and where they should be closed, they are closed. So that overall supervision, as it were, is from the safeguarding team.
I just want to come back in briefly on the letter that was mentioned. Yes, I have sent this to the Officer for the Children's panel, so they've got sight of that. But also I think it was of interest to us tonight, and I think this might be more Dr. Addy Cooper's remit, but it was about the joint working between the Adults Safeguarding Board and the Children's Safeguarding Board. So we'll pick it up at that point. I don't know if you want to pick it up now. Okay, if you pick it up now, that's great. Thanks.
So the last meeting of the Haringey Safeguarding Adult Board was just before the publication of this report, so we couldn't consider it. But actually Beverly raised it at the meeting, and so we've agreed to look at it next time, because we need someone from Children's Services really to present that, to look at what the joint agenda might be going forward. So it will be on our next board meeting agenda to look at this.
I think a wider question from that would be, because obviously there is within your own report, the Adult Safeguarding Report, that understanding about how those two boards work together and effectively. So I just wondered whether they had, with the issues that they seem to be having within the Children's Safeguarding Board, whether it's going to be an easy working relationship, or whether it'll be more difficult because of the issues that are surrounding, that's coming out from this report. It just seems that there's some strategic, it says insufficient strategic leadership or prioritisation from the local Safeguarding Children's Board, or the partnership to address this deficit, and that was actually in relation to counselling support for children. But it was just about the bit that was seemed to be a concern was that strategic leadership. So I'm just wondering about how the adult board is having that conversation with the children's board, and whether the children's and adults meet together, or how does it actually work?
So there has been a conversation, so I meet with the interim chair. I have met with the interim independent chair of the children's board, but obviously not since this report has come out. There aren't regular meetings between the two boards. There has been interface on particular areas of working, And certainly there have been some items that have been brought to the Adults Board, such as domestic abuse, that have come up from the Children's Board, where we've looked at it and looked at the specific issues that affect that involve adult safeguarding. So it's not a simple response. I think it's more of a as and when things have arisen like this, there is a piece of joint work that's proportionate to the common, I suppose, ground across adults and children's safeguarding. I think it's too soon to say what might happen as a result of this particular piece of work, but I think it would be fair to say that there is a precedent for joint work in particular areas in the 2.5 years that I've been chairing the Adults Board, although as you may or may not be aware, there have been changes in the chairing of the Children's Board. When the new interim chair came in last year, we did meet and have a conversation about and discuss potential areas for joint working. So there is an appetite, I suppose it would be fair to say, for joint working, and there is some history of joint working, and that is probably a fairly positive place to then be looking at this particular what would be the response across the two boards in terms of what would be appropriate for the Adults Board to think about in terms of our planning and priorities for next year.
Yes, Councillor Adamu and then Councillor Berryman.
Thank you. I'm just a bit concerned because you're talking about the boards and two boards and communicating with each other. My concern is the communication has to come all the way down. I mean, is the director of Children's Services involved on the board? Would they respond to this paper with an action plan in place? How will it go down to the right people who actually are the front line staff which deliver the service to realize where the weaknesses are to pick it up? Because sometimes people are lost on these boards and higher up offices and so on. But the concern is, at the end of the day, with all due respect, you are not the people who do the work. So it needs to acknowledge where the weaknesses are. They need to put an action plan together. They need to speak to their staff. Because it's really, when I read, I haven't read it all, I'm going to read it when I get home. What I read so far, it really, really worries me. And if I'm not happy, something's going to happen. I think I'm going to take it elsewhere for discussion. I think it's really concerning. Somebody who have been involved in the past, not now, Children's Services and the rest, are really, how can I put it? It's really very concerning, Chair. Thank you.
Just to be clear, this is obviously for the children's safeguarding, but I think it was just because there's, and actually there was one of the points that I was going to come to, which was domestic abuse. And obviously within domestic abuse, this would be when children are neglected. I just wondered if that was something that was coming, and that was the bit I was going to ask Charlotte, to be honest, because that, to me, where this ties in to this conversation. So it was really about that joint working with the two safeguarding boards, in particular around the domestic abuse. So I don't know if you could just just expand on that a little bit more, Charlotte. Thank you.
So as AD has mentioned, we have sought to sort of share information better between the two boards to make sure that we have got information recorded accurately for each board. We're doing, as I also mentioned, we have the VORG, the Violence Against Women and Girls Strategic Group, which again is multi-agency. The Director of Children's Services, Director of Adult Services sit on that board, and it's chaired by the Director of Public Health. It also has health, police, community organisations, providers working with women affected by violence, there is a very strong sort of community response in response to the VORG strategy. Also, through our commissioning activity, are working to better identify incidents of domestic abuse which may or may not have children involved, so whether an individual person or with family. And in fact, the CCG, the Clinical Commissioning Group, commissioned a service called IRIS, which is about intervening and identifying through primary care issues of domestic abuse and having a route for referring them through, and that is already resulting in referrals into MARAC, which is the multi-agency response group for cases identified through primary care. I think one of the issues raised through violence against women and girls is obviously that, and domestic violence specifically, is that often there are a number of victims, so it might be the woman in the household, and maybe children, and what we've done is work very closely with children's services and with adult services about the pathways to support. So as well as the IRIS service, we're very fortunate to have Hearthstone, which is delivered through Homes for Haringey. We have IDVA services, which is the Independent Domestic Violence Advocacy provision. We have refuges in the borough and obviously access to refuges outside the borough for Haringey women affected by violence. And we are working on support to those women affected by multiple issues, for example, drugs, alcohol, homelessness and domestic violence. So there's quite a huge, significant amount of work around domestic abuse, and it is raised and flagged through the information to the board.
Councillor Berryman.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, the domestic abuse was what caught my eye. I didn't really appreciate, I think I've been on the committee about 2 years, that this was under our remit, because it hasn't had a lot of attention. So seeing it now makes me think it should really get a bit more attention, especially as you say 80% of all the cases reported as a crime relate to domestic violence. It says only 5% end up with the perpetrator being charged, yet 93% of cases the risk is reduced or removed. So how is the risk reduced or removed in 93% of the cases if the conviction rate is so low?
The 80% cases is the number calls out to the police system rather than necessarily the percentage of safeguarding alerts into the authority. So there is a differential, and there's a lower number of domestic abuse cases into the council. It is notable that there is a low rate of both charging and prosecution for domestic violence. It's an area that has been picked up in the VORG strategy, the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, in terms of taking action against perpetrators. So we are working with police colleagues, but often, as has been in the media quite often recently, there's a sort of complex process of supporting women to bring charges to go through with convictions, as well as to actually follow through to conviction for perpetrators. So, but it is very much in the strategy and part of the approach of the Violence Against Women and Girls group. It's fair to say our figures are fairly low across London, but the conviction and rates across London are fairly low as well if you look at a map across London.
I don't know if I misunderstood the answer there. On the risk reduced, 93% risk is reduced or removed. Is that in the domestic violence cases or something else? I misunderstood.
The percentage of domestic abuse cases as a percentage of all safeguarding cases is not 80%. So it's not 93% or 80%, if you know what I mean. They form a smaller percentage of the overall figure.
Okay, so for clarity, what percentage is domestic abuse?
The figures I've got from the report we're just going to talk about, which are for 16-17, if you look at page 19 of the annual report, it's less. It looks like about 7 or 8% of its type of abuse reported that's involved in safeguarding activity. Less than 10% is domestic abuse. So the amount, because for adult safeguarding, I suppose that what's really important to understand is that people who come through for adult safeguarding support have to have care and support needs, and it's because of those care and support needs they're unable to protect themselves from abuse and harm. So it's a different cohort, or it's a subset of a cohort of people who are subject to domestic abuse. And safeguarding covers a whole range of types of harm and neglect, of which in Haringey for last year, but looks like about 6-7% were domestic abuse cases. So it's you're looking at data for different types, from a different type of lens, I suppose would be a way of saying it.
Are there any other questions on that? If not, I will ask a question on going right back to one of your beginning slides. I briefly picked up you saying about the section 42, there were a certain number that weren't completed. I wasn't quick enough to work out what that number was, and if they weren't completed, what sort of timeline do they have? So from when they should be completed. I don't know if it's supposed to be completed in a certain amount of months or...
The information we've got here is that there were 28 Section 42 investigations that hadn't been completed from April 17 through to December 17. And as you know, as evidenced by Councillor Adamu's questions, those are allocated across to the individual teams within the council. So there's an average outstanding for those of 60 days. But we can get more information back to you if you want more detail about the assessment time frame and the actual times rather than the average time.
Yes, no, I think that'd be helpful. It's just so that we can work out how long these are overrunning, but continuing by. And also, so it's 28 of them haven't been completed. Out of how many? So I'm just trying to read that quickly. Is there a number? What's the actual...
On the slide before, so it's I'll do the sums. It's about 150 go to section 42.
And I was going to ask another question on you were saying about the different types of abuse. You mentioned emotional abuse, physical abuse, but financial abuse. My understanding is that that's increasing, and I was wondering if there was any link between that and personal budgets, whereby a person might be holding a lot more financial, money, and that might be more of an issue. So there may be somebody within the family who, and that's why I'm wondering if that's financial abuse, or are you talking about financial abuse from cold callers coming from outside? Thank you.
So I think it's financial abuse can include a whole range of things, from scamming to family members abusing members of their families. So it is a whole range of issues come under the category. Is number one. Number two, there has been a long-term concern about the potential risk of increasing financial abuse for all sorts of different reasons. The research that was done on direct payments and safeguarding risks a couple of years ago showed that there was no correlation between, and in that sense, people managing their own budgets through a direct payment than not having care organised through sort of council brokerage. So the evidence that we have from research, because that always was raised as a concern around the risks of people managing their own budgets, that they may be more vulnerable, the evidence we have from research does suggest that it doesn't seem to be. That isn't to say it doesn't happen, and in fact, only this week I've heard of a couple of quite tricky cases of direct, not in Haringey, I have to add, because I work in other places as well. I have heard of a couple of issues of direct payments and financial abuse in those circumstances, but then I think it would be fair to say you can see financial abuse, and I'm looking at CQC colleagues here, in institutional settings as well. So it's not, I think that it happens, and it happens across the piece. We don't have the evidence to date to suggest that it's any more risky when people have control of their own finances. But that isn't to say it doesn't happen at all. It's just the evidence doesn't suggest that it's any more risky.
Thank you. I just thought I'd raise that because that's always a concern that comes up. And you, Charlotte, you mentioned that the incidence of neglect is increasing. Is that sort of substantially compared year on year, or is that just I was just wondering what you meant when you said it was increasing?
The figures on self-neglect, you can see that quarter 2 and quarter 3 are up from quarter 1 in the blue, although neglect is down. So I think one of the areas that the board has been working on is some information around different types of abuse, and self-neglect and neglect have been picked up as part of those. I think it is, again, quite a tricky area in terms of people's right to self-determination and determining how they will lead their lives, and the level of safeguarding risk that may pose for that individual. So we did some joint work across NCL, the North Central London boroughs, looking at self-neglect and neglect as an area of concern, and I think it was picked up in the London work as well. Because it poses quite a set of difficult questions for practitioners often in terms of responding.
From your graph, it seems like the figures have dropped dramatically. So is there any rational reason behind that?
I'm not aware of any, but we can look into it. I mean, there might be some coding issues between self-neglect and neglect, and actually once it's defined, I think because we've done some work on self-neglect, that might have led to a greater awareness of that and being coded as self-neglect rather than as neglect.
Sorry, I'm rather hogging the questions here. Does anyone from the panel would like to raise any further questions? I've got a couple more, otherwise we'll move on from this. Yep, Councillor Adamou.
Forgive me if it's here and I haven't seen it. Have you broken it down into sort of groups, for instance, older people, people with learning disabilities, or younger disabled people? Have you broken it down? Have you identified which group is more at risk? Thank you.
So we have broken it down. It isn't actually in this slide deck, but we have broken it down by care group, as it were, as you were saying, by locality, so where the abuse takes place, and by age and by ethnicity. So we do have that breakdown. It isn't actually in this slide deck, but the profile of the users we have broken down. Yeah.
So again, if you look at the annual report for last year, for 2016-17, on 6.12, you've got gender and age, and 6.13, ethnicity. So we do at the board, so we look at those issues because one wants to see if there are any patterns or trends or changes. It's not in this particular slide deck, but it is something that's kept under review through the subgroup that Charlotte chairs.
Okay, just going back to this presentation, I just want to go to your protection plans. You said 23% were outstanding, but again, I wasn't sure by how long, so when they should have been finished.
You can see on the dates, some are over 1 month, some are over 2 months outstanding, and some are awaiting assessment for protection plan, and some are awaiting review. So there are some over 2 months. We can get back to you again with specific figures if that would be helpful.
Councillor Griffiths, welcome. Would you like to go and sit next to Councillor Bull, if that's all right? It's just that we've got family members going to be coming where you're sitting, so it's probably best. Thank you. Right. Okay, and the other question is that actually we're going to come on to safeguarding, making safeguarding personal, so I won't ask that, or leave that one from that slide. I haven't, care homes. You had 15 requires improvement, 2 were inadequate. So just going back to that slide there. So there's a fair number. What's the percentage of that? 65, good. So I'm just trying to work out how many percentage-wise requires improvement.
So 65% are rated good, none is outstanding, 2 inadequate, which is less than, which is about 4%. So it's the mix of those. So it's about 25%, I think.
So amongst those that require improvement, are these ones that we don't place any clients in at the moment? Because obviously that's something that we've brought up before. So is that still happening? And is there any particular, are each one of these having particular input from adults and commissioning in Haringey to sort of improve them, or is this down to the provider to do that level of improvement?
There's a number of ways that we work with providers. So we have a regular quarterly, in fact, information sharing meeting with the CQC, the CCG, the local authority to identify cases where we have concerns, where there's been an inspection or an assessment that has highlighted issues, or where we have any, so that we share information. We have daily joint working between the CCG and the local authority in terms of responding to issues raised in homes. We do joint visits, we offer joint support, we do unannounced visits, we do announced visits, we go through every part of the home or the care agency's activity and support them. So it's fair to say that, but we do, at the end of the day, it is the provider's responsibility to make sure that they meet the standards. So we can only do so much. The provider still has to step up and do the work as well. So it's always a bit of a joint effort, but just to say it's joint across the CCG and the local authority and with the provider. So that's the process that we use. Our aim is always to work with providers to try and get that service and quality improvement, and so we will be actively working with the organisations on this list.
To be really clear, we don't actually place any of our clients into any homes that are obviously inadequate but requires improvement as well.
Yeah, so the policy is that we place in good or outstanding homes. Obviously, there are some homes which requires improvement whilst we have placements there and we work with them. So that's the process.
Right, thank you very much. I'm going to close that section of that part. So, Dr. Cooper, do you want to go on to yours? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, what you have to look at is the annual report for 2016-17, and it's a statutory duty of the board to publish a report. And basically, it's to say what did we think we were going to do during that period of time, and to what extent have we been able to do that in terms of meeting our objectives of helping to work together to provide better services to keep people safe and safeguarded in Haringey. It's a combination of a number of different things. It's data, so we've already referred to some of the data about what goes on, what's happening in terms of safeguarding in Haringey. It's what the board has done together, so some of the joint initiatives and multi-agency working. And it's also what the partners have done individually in their own roles and responsibilities as individual agencies, as partners of the board. So it is a combination of those things. And then finally, it also includes what we intended to do for the following year, i.e. for this year, 17-18. And I apologise, there's, I think, a typo in the covering report. So you've got the strategic plan priorities for this year. And so, again, at the end of this year, we'll be reporting on, well, how, to what extent have we done what we said we were going to do. So I think it's this would have been my second year as chairing the board, and I think it would be fair to say that there was a real continued improvement in terms of the way people are very willing to work together to identify the areas that need to be supported to change, and to get a better understanding of what it is that is going on in the borough and how we can identify areas that need improvement. So I'll just use one example, and it's come up already around pressure ulcers. This is an issue for us in the borough. During that year, the protocol was improved. I think there was quite a lot of work done on understanding neglect, and you saw that sort of evidenced in the changing this year's data that Charlotte just described about understanding self-neglect and neglect, which is relatively new into adult safeguarding work. And I think the final thing I'd say about that year is that we undertook a safeguarding adult review, which is the item following, so I won't go into that now, which again is one of the 3 statutory duties we have as a Safeguarding Adult Board. I think in terms of the priorities for this year, because we are already nearly at the end of this year, so I did want to say a bit about that. What's very helpful in terms of seeing Charlotte's presentation is that there is a big shift and progress in terms of understanding what's happening in terms of information, particularly in getting information about what the impact is of the safeguarding work that partners do in Haringey. And that's the Making Safeguarding Personal bit of this. So what outcomes do people want? How do they want to be able to be safer and protected in their lives? And that improvement work in terms of raising awareness and improving staff competency and ability to work with people to identify what it is that they want to achieve through the safeguarding process, and then being able to achieve that, I think has been a real step change during this year. So how the practice of safeguarding is actually delivered in the borough, I think has, I'm not saying it's not necessarily that it's shifted, but we've got much clearer evidence of it shifting. Whether it was shifting already, but we didn't have the evidence. I think now we've got better evidence that it is shifting. And so as the chair of the board, I think I'd be very pleased to note that improvements have been made in that area. I won't say anything more about the detail because I know there are questions and you're under pressure for time in terms of your agenda. So if that's okay, I'll pause there and see what questions people want to raise. It is quite a lengthy report, but hopefully with enough detail for people to be able to ask any particular questions they want.
Okay, I'll start with questions from the panel. Has anyone got questions on the safeguarding report? Helena.
I'm sorry, I might miss this, but I wonder if I could ask you to explain to me how you tackle the different cultures and diversity where you might actually find issues of getting information about safeguarding quite difficult. I don't want to pick out a particular community, but I do know that there are difficulties, for instance, amongst the Somali community, and I don't see that reflected here. I wonder if you could just say a bit about that.
I think it's a very interesting and important question. So we have a subgroup that works on engagement and communication, and we have been trying to promote adult safeguarding awareness, particularly in the voluntary sector and in some of the community, in community groups. It's not a quick change, and I think it's been an area where there's been a lot of discussion. I don't sit on that group, but I think it would be fair to say those issues are raised, and they do come up through to the board. And most recently, there has been, well, not during this year, so it's not in the year of that report, but hopefully we will be able to report on it in this year's report. The bridge which leads for the voluntary sector networking has had a couple of sessions with community representatives around raising awareness of adult safeguarding work, and I think working with community groups at whatever pace and ability there is to promote and translate adult safeguarding into a way, into a language and a process that people can actually make use of, is an ongoing challenge for all of us. You know, if I walk down the street, if I'm in the shopping centre, and I say to somebody, "What do you think adult safeguarding is?" they'll probably look at me quite blankly. It's not an easily accessible area of work, so I'm impatient in terms of wanting to progress this area of work, but I think we also have to work with people who are working in those communities and can work with us to raise awareness of adult safeguarding. So it's, I think, a really useful question and a useful challenge. I haven't got an answer for you today, but just to say it is really an area that we are looking at through communication and engagement and community working as a key partner from the board.
So just how would you measure how well you're doing in those areas? I mean, sorry, but I think it's important.
How do you measure? Ultimately, the measurement would be that you see referrals coming through from concerns from those communities. And so that's why the information and data about what we are seeing is so critical. But I wouldn't, I suppose that's one way of seeing it, would be, are we getting concerns raised across all communities, because it's through concerns that you are confident that people are beginning to ask the right questions. And that's probably as far as that goes, because if they raise a concern, they're in a position where they're saying, well, is this safeguarding or isn't it? It's a starting point to then say, to have that conversation about, well, what is safeguarding, and should this come through a safeguarding pathway, or should there be something else that maybe needs to be done about the circumstances that somebody is finding themselves in and the person who's raising the concern is worried about.
That's a really good point, and I think maybe one of the recommendations from this evening would be that as a panel we would be particularly interested in the work, and I think it's done by the Bridge Renewal Trust, into the community engagement, just to ensure we're not just asking the same communities the same questions, that we are sort of stretching into different communities, and the whole point about how do you monitor that. So I think that would be a really useful look sort of for the next year. So if I could flag that up now, because that's helpful, Helena. Thank you. Any other questions on safeguarding? Okay, I'll ask a few. I have loads, so I'm actually going to put them down a little bit. Okay, so I think one of the biggest questions is, after this report and looking at all the different partners that are working alongside, I have to say they had varying safeguarding reports that came through, and also noting, I think on one of the pages, the attendance record of some of the people who maybe didn't attend as frequently as one would expect. How confident are you that the safeguarding that is currently happening within Haringey is good, is where you would like it to be? Or are there any areas where you think, actually, within maybe this stakeholder, or maybe this is an area that I'd be particularly interested in focusing in on? So that's a big question, but I thought I'd ask it at the outset.
There has been actually generally very good attendance, although it's not consistent, and I think that from where I'm sitting, the key partners engage, if not in the board, in the subgroups, by and large. So the board attendance is a snapshot at the board level, and is not necessarily the full, I suppose, check of whether people are engaged in safeguarding or not. So I would have a slightly more tolerant view in terms of engagement. Is sort of one general comment I'd make. Although obviously you do want to see people participate and engage consistently, and on that I think there is sometimes a issue of churn, of people changing roles and picking up roles. So sometimes, and that's true for across the public sector, I think, or across the sector. So with those sorts of caveats, I don't have any really serious concerns about any individual member member agency not participating at all in any way at this point, although I'm very happy to, outside this meeting, follow up with any particular agencies that colleagues may be concerned about. That hasn't come to my attention particularly. In terms of a judgment about how people are safeguarded, I'd refer back to the data that Charlotte was presenting and say we are only able to make that judgment based on the information that we get. And so from the quality of the information, which has improved in the time I've chaired the board, it would appear to me to be the fact from that safeguarding practice is improving in Haringey. It's a very, very challenging area of work, so I'd hesitate to say it's, at a, it's very challenging. B, I have extremely high standards, and I think that's probably one of the reasons I chair the board, is that I have very high expectations, and I don't think, I think we will always be wanting to improve practice. It's complex, and people experience very difficult challenges in their lives, and these aren't easy issues to resolve. So in a way, it's like painting the Forth Bridge. You kind of never, I don't think we'll ever get to, we will be on a constant journey of improving our understanding of the types of abuse there are, the sorts of things we can help people with in their lives, improving the partnership working and the way people work together, and improving our learning. And I'll come back to the SAR, because what the Safeguarding Adult Reviews do is shine a very sharp light on things where they evidently aren't working well, and that then gives you, or gives us, an opportunity to say, okay, it's really clear that these are areas that we need to, as a partnership, focus on in terms of that improvement journey. So I'm not going to answer your question, perhaps in the way that you would want me to. And make that, I can't, there isn't a national template that says, there are tools and, for example, standards, there are competencies, there are all sorts of things that help us understand practice and how effective practice is, and there is data. And I'd say, what would I say? I'm confident that people are trying to improve and do their best across the partnership and trying to learn.
That did answer the question. Thank you. And I think what I was going to ask as well is about this. There's a lot of mention amongst the different reports about the public awareness campaign and designing posters and going out to speak to people. I just wanted to know, how did that, because it was all for the summer of 2017, so has that taken off? Because, I mean, if there was a public awareness campaign, maybe I wasn't the target audience, but I didn't see anything. So they might have been in areas that weren't necessarily that I noted. So is there any information on that?
Colleagues in the public gallery who sit on the board who have been party to very difficult conversations about how to raise public awareness, and the posters have been designed and they have been circulated, but there haven't been resources to put them on bus stops or put them in to do that kind of blanket dissemination that in an ideal world I think probably we would want to see, and I would want to see. So within the resources that were available, that have been available, documents and posters and leaflets have been produced for agencies to use, but it hasn't been that kind of, radio, TV, buses type publicity campaign, I think, would be the quickest way to answer that question.
So were they available were sort of posters put up in care homes and nursing homes, GP practices? Because that's the sort of place that you might, expect that people may be more aware, or just community centres where, people may be going.
So the posters were sent out electronically, and because we didn't have, so the board has a very limited resources. There is no budget for publications. So what happened was they were designed and they were sent out to partners to disseminate internally or through their networks. So I would have to ask our CCG colleague whether that went to all the GP surgeries, for example. But as I say, if we haven't, someone's care homes, the care home sector doesn't sit on the board necessarily, so I don't think, I'm looking at Charlotte here, I don't think we would have, as a board, the networks to send that out through to individual care homes unless it was done through commissioning colleagues.
It's not something we have done, but we regularly raise safeguarding and those awareness at the provider forum, which we have monthly. So we could certainly think about whether there was a route for those to do that.
Yeah, I think particularly sorry, I'll come back to you, but I think particularly because obviously you commission within all the different homes, and I think there would be that point of access, so especially if it's as an email or sent electronically, then maybe that could be something that link could be made and therefore it could go out, because at least then the manager, I'm assuming, would print out them and put them up. So I think that would be quite an effective way of doing it. Sorry, Councillor Brabazon.
I was looking down your list of membership, which is on page 46, page 47, and I don't know if this is a statutory list or you can invite other bodies, but it just struck me that the Department of Work and Pensions seems to be missing from this list, and given the fact that they are providing people with benefits, and there are so many dreadful cases that are in the press regarding lack of payment, medical assessments and what happens to people, whether that is something you might consider in your work for vulnerable adults.
So the statutory partners for boards are the local authority, police and health. So no, they're not a statutory partner. DWP haven't been invited to join the board. It's a very good question, and I'm happy to go back and ask them if they would want to. I do chair a couple of other boards, and I haven't come across the DWP as partners on safeguarding adult boards, and I think it's a really interesting challenge back, actually, which I'll raise with my colleagues across my colleague chairs across London and elsewhere to see whether they've had success in doing that and how that works. So thank you for raising that as an issue. It's not something that I've picked up before.
Because I'm interested, I mean, obviously you're not talking about any of your cases or anything, but I would be curious in the work of the adult services in dealing with complex cases, how much safeguarding work is driven or precipitated by problems caused by assessments which are, we see the mad assessments in the press. These assessments where people with cancer are told, "Oh, you go to work," and all of that sort of thing. So I wonder how much that comes up in the work of the safeguarding teams or adult services, which might then link to, or might then be interpreted as a safeguarding issue, which might assist people in not being treated so badly by the government.
That's a very useful question. Our data at present does not have that level of detail, but we'll be happy to take that away and look further into it.
Hi. Yeah, I was just having a look at Councillor Brabazon drew our attention to page 47, and I noticed, and I happen to know the Director of Nursing at North Middlesex. I see she wasn't able to attend any of the meetings. I know that there's obviously some challenges at North Mid. She's quite new in post, from what I remember. Do we encourage our partners to try and send substitutes to meetings? Because I noticed that we're asking both the Director and the Deputy Director of Nursing at North Mid to attend, but only the Deputy Director of Nursing at Whittington. So perhaps we could look at trying to get some kind of substitution in place.
Can I assure members that we do accept substitutes, and actually that's in response to my earlier question around participation. the North Mids actually have been fairly consistently represented at the board and also at subgroups where particularly the one I chair, when they've been invited, they've come. So that's why I was trying to give a bit of caution of not taking this fully at face value, because the engagement of partners in the work of the board is not necessarily always clearly reflected in this attendance. And perhaps it's slightly misleading, in fact, to publish it, because it leads to perhaps questions that then call into question the engagement of partners in the board. So that's quite a helpful feedback in terms of the future reports, really.
Thank you. I'm going to ask to move on now to, are you going to speak to Appendix 1, the Equality Assurance? Is that the next bit? Because that was the bit, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this bit was as a result of the adults panel asking for further information about risk in relation to people with safeguarding issues. And I think we were picking up last time, at the last report that we had, that there was concern there may be pockets of people having, increased risk. It might be around age, it might be around area. So we've got this Appendix 1, and I'm assuming that's in relation to that, but it might not be. It might just be purely random. But if anyone wants to speak to that, otherwise we'll just ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So on Appendix 1, page 92, so we attempt to answer the question, I think was posed, as you rightly said, Councillor O'Connor, by the panel, why safeguarding concerns are increasingly in people's own homes. And a fairly straightforward statistical answer, in the majority of care that we actually commissioned that actually take place in people's homes. So one would expect that there to be a correlation in terms of the level of safeguarding inquiries. So we have 60% of packages being delivered at the person's home. And this is in line with approximately 60% of all safeguarding concerns being raised, sourced from individuals' own homes, as reflected in the data on that page. Yeah. Following on from that, on page 93, obviously we want to raise awareness very much out there in the community. So the prevention subgroup is currently looking at providing awareness via GPs and colleges. And also the data also indicates that there's no specific hotspot, as it were, for these concerns that occur in people's homes. They're sort of spread quite evenly across the borough. The next area, do you want me to pause there or go on?
I think it was just a note, because when we saw the maps, it was such an even spread. So I think that's because you've made the point there's no significant hotspot. I mean, I read to the end. Is there anything that can be done sort of to look a little bit further on into, this, it's within the home, but is there anything that is being targeted specifically to raise awareness amongst social workers or whomever that this is the area, and it's actually completely across the board? I mean, it's from east to west, west to east. There is no differentiation at all, north to south of that map. So is there anything that we're doing or you're doing further to raise that awareness amongst staff, and obviously they know that the large portion of the abuse is in the home. So how is that sort of message getting out there that this can be reported more easily?
So I think the area for intervention wouldn't mainly lie with staff. It would be in communities, with neighbours, with GP practices, etc. So that's where the prevention subgroup is focusing attention. I think staff are well aware, but yeah. So then moving on to page 94, I think a question was asked about the low level of outcomes for making safeguarding personal figures and what we're doing differently in 17-18. And there's an explanation on the page. So basically, there was an issue with Mosaic, which meant that practitioners weren't actually prompted to record that they've actually asked a question. So therefore, the data that we pulled from that wasn't as robust as we would like. We've since resolved this, and it's now mandatory. You can't actually continue inputting your information until you've answered that, and that's also reflected in the improvement in the percentage of individuals being actually asked what outcome they would like. As of December last year, that was 90%. Okay. Moving on to page 95, and this is an area that we've had quite extensive discussions about, and we agreed to monitor the level of Section 42 inquiries based on looking at benchmarked authorities and a kind of a bandwidth within which we felt it should fall. So we don't want too low safeguarding inquiries because it could mean that it's underreporting, and if it's too high, then we have concerns around safeguarding the extent of it. But when we dug deeper into the information that we have, we've actually, although there is a low rate progressing on to Section 42, we recognise that practitioners were actually doing preventative work very early on in the pathway. So very often cases might have been referred on to mental health for case management, for example, and that would then not need to proceed to a Section 42 inquiry or other case management areas of the service. And that's, so we think that's a positive. So we are actually looking at how we can actually report that preventative aspect of the work in a more readily available form. I think those were the queries. Yep.
I'm going to be reasonably swift because obviously we've got lots of people waiting for the next item. So if there are any burning questions, raise them now on that. If not, we've got the Learning from Safeguard Adult Review. So I take it you've all read that. So a very brief oversight on this, and then we'll take some questions, and then we'll move on to the Osborne Grove item. Apologies, everyone, but this has taken a while, and safeguarding takes a while sometimes, but it needs to be done. So, Dr. Cooper.
Thank you. So, as I said earlier, one of the most critical things that we did last year was undertake a safeguarding adult review, and you have the report presentation here that looks at the findings and analysis, the learning and the actions. And I think what I would want to stress is the reason for undertaking reviews is to learn. It's not to blame, it's to learn. And what was really useful with this review is that it pointed to a whole range of types of learning for particular agencies, and those are addressed in terms of the particular bullet points, but also more broadly for all practitioners. And so when we're thinking about what's the learning and what's the impact, it's both for the agencies involved, particularly in these areas of work, but also there's wider learning for all of us around how we understand risk, how we listen to people, how we deal with safeguarding activity. So this was a very particular report, a very specific review. It was carried out independently. We followed the review panel followed the policy and protocol we have in Haringey for undertaking these types of reviews. And he was a man who unfortunately took his own life, or appeared to have taken his own life, although the inquest actually recorded an open verdict with... Sorry? Robert. I met with, I suppose, putting this aside, one of the most important things for me with this review was meeting with his sister and her husband and making sure that they were involved in this process and they could see that as a partnership we took what had happened with Robert as being a really important contribution to understanding how agencies hadn't really worked well enough together to support him and his family, and how we were going to take from this really significant learning around how we could improve the way in which agencies work together. So in particular, the focus was very much around how housing, when in this case his father had died, how tenancies, vulnerable people, were supported through change in terms of their tenancy, and his vulnerabilities hadn't really been acknowledged or picked up through the various agencies he'd had contact with. So the criteria for undertaking a safeguarding adult review is that there is an hypothesis that agencies have not worked well together, and it is this interface and partnership between agencies which the board is trying to improve constantly in terms of being able to safeguard vulnerable people. So what you have, and I won't go into the detail, is the particular learning for Homes for Haringey, because obviously they were key in managing his housing needs, the learning for adult social services, and the learning for housing-related support. As an outcome of undertaking a safeguarding adult review, the recommendations are translated into an action plan. So each agency looks at, and even before the review was completed, I'm pleased to say that agencies didn't wait for the review to be completed before they started doing work to change systems and processes and practice and staff capabilities in these areas. So, you know, there was a prompt response whilst the review was being undertaken. And the improvement actions have been undertaken, and as the chair of the SAR subgroup, the Safeguarding Adult Review subgroup, we were monitoring that agencies were undertaking the actions, the improvement actions they said they would undertake. I think the outstanding piece of work from this has been to maybe disseminate more widely the learning from this review, and the proposal that came to the last Safeguarding Adult Board was to hold a couple of multi-agency workshops for staff across the board who hadn't necessarily been involved in agencies directly affected by this review, so the learning is further spread. Anecdotally, because I took this review to the borough's suicide prevention group, there was a frontline housing worker at that meeting who said she knew about the review. She talked about practice that had changed, unprompted practice that had changed as a result of the review. So I was reassured that it had actually filtered through to frontline staff, and that there had been changes made as an outcome of this very unfortunate death. I think that's all I should say at this point, and whether there are any questions for me.
Right, are there any questions from the panel on this? I've got... okay. So I noted from this that it seemed to be communication and lack of between the different agencies. There were delays and information wasn't passed along. People didn't recognise the importance of that information. And things weren't acted on. So I think for me, whilst I completely accept that things have changed and that's been put in, how will you monitor this in, say, a year or 2 years' time to see that what has initially started off, because sometimes when something like this happens, which is tragic, and, you know, and everyone's thinking, right, well, what can we do to change this? But then things can slip. With the best will in the world, managers change, etc. So I'm just wondering what's in place so that in sort of 2 years' time, if you ever ask that question, you could say, actually, this is exactly what's happening, and we know because.
So the answer, that's the work under the Safeguarding Adult Review Group, and we are keeping it under review, as it were. And you're absolutely, it's absolutely pertinent to say, how do you know that not just change is initiated, but that it's embedded and it becomes business as usual? So the things that, you know, in the immediate term, people may do something different, but then revert to poor patterns of behaviour. So I think it's a really important point. It's how do you know that change has been sustained? And so through that subgroup, we will be coming back to monitor whether the things that we've expected to have changed have got that longer term impact in terms of sustainability of change. So that would be the way in which that would happen.
I think that was the most important. So you see, Councillor Babazon.
I was going to ask that same question because I had a case as a councillor about a notice to quit, so this was very resonant. But the thing I want to ask you, the second question I would ask you is about the timelines, because it says here that the needs assessment was delayed and a staged implementation of new allocations policy, and that it took 3 months to consider the referral. So that's all about systems, but it's also about prompt action, because this is terrible what happened here. And there is no guarantee there's going to be fewer notices to quit. So every inquiry says it's about lack of partnership working and lack of communication. Every single child abuse inquiry, and I'm sure these says exactly the same things that need to change. So in terms of this, how following on from Pippa's question about monitoring, have these timescales been improved? Because Homes for Haringey has got a lot of very vulnerable people living in their accommodation. Okay.
I can't answer that question today, but it's very helpful that you raise this in terms of prioritising what we then look at in terms of sustained improvement. So I will pick that up in terms of looking at how, over time, this changes. I think the bit I am reassured about is because this happened at a point in which a new process was introduced and it wasn't properly embedded, I think I am reassured that there's better understanding and communication about vulnerability and picking up on those issues. And that those processes of joint communication about vulnerable people who are subject to notice to quit, that those processes have improved. I don't know that I've got that data about timescales, but I'm certainly happy to go back and look at that.
Okay, well that's useful because I think that's very helpful. So, I'm going to wrap up this section now, but I will give sort of just a quick overview of those recommendations. So there was one that Dr. Cooper just mentioned about the sustained improvement and the embedding of that and how that could be monitored. There was one about the Bridge Renewal Trust and their ability to engage with different communities about the information regarding safeguarding. One final thing that we picked up right at the very beginning, actually, Councillor Adamu, is working arrangements with the Children's Safeguarding Board, in particular in relation to domestic abuse. So I think, as an example, sort of when you come next year with the report, it would be really useful to see how that structure has been there, because at the moment I understand it seems more of an ad hoc when things crop up, but obviously there's issues around domestic abuse and with the children's aspect to that. I think that would be really helpful to get further information on that. We've recommended about posters with the communication commissioning team, and was it something on the DWP, Councillor Brabazon, that you wanted? Sorry, just very briefly.
It just strikes me that this particular agency it would be very useful to have a relationship with them because of the whole issue of medical assessments and payments and all that.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So, Dr. Cooper, I know you had to leave, so thank you very much for staying. And thank you ever so much, everyone who's been waiting very patiently for the next item that we're now going to take, which is on Osborne Grove. This is an update. Thank you. This is an update from, I think we've got from the CCG. Sorry, do you want to introduce yourself? Sorry, I haven't got your name. Oh, Claire Henderson. Sorry, I've just been told that. Thank you. There you go. I introduced you. So we've just got...
Before the CCG comes in, I want to make a few comments.
So we're going to start with the Cabinet member. We've got different people around the table who can then give us further information. And there'll be opportunities to ask families and carers and staff if they'd like to contribute, because you're experts in this area. This is your area of expertise. So if you'd like to come up and join in that, that would be really useful, and we'd appreciate that. And obviously we'll take questions from the panel as normal. Thank you.
Chair, can I just say the decision to close Osborne Grove was taken in December, and there's now a clear process in place post that decision. So consultation is taking place with staff, advocacy teams are working with relatives and the residents there. At this juncture, it's actually very important that relatives understand the process.
I'll let people rearrange mics as Councillor Vanier continues. I think everyone else is fine. Lovely. Thank you. Councillor Vanier, do you like to continue?
Thank you, Chair. As I was saying, at this juncture, it's very, very important that residents and that residents understand the process that is taking place. To that end, I am in the process of organising a meeting for residents and families at Osborne Grove. The reason for that is that it's very important that there's total understanding about what is actually taking place now. The decision has been made, the process is taking place. Furthermore, Chair, with all due respect, I'd like to say that this is a meeting about adult social care. It's not about the closure of Osborne Grove. This is not the arena really for this discussion, and I am organising a meeting which ward members are quite free to attend, but this is a meeting about adults and children's safeguarding. It is not a meeting about the closure of Osborne Grove, a decision that has already been taken. So I just want to make that very clear.
Okay, well then I shall come in as the chair to explain the rationale for having this today. This has always been something that we've always had on the agenda. This has been on the agenda, I think, for around 4 to 6 months. So this was always going to be an item on this agenda, and you're right, since then the closure has been announced. But also it's very important for Scrutiny to look at what's going on and make sure that everyone involved has got very clear understanding. So it was a very good opportunity to do that tonight. We've got everyone present who has taken part in this process, and it was an incredibly useful time to give facts and information so that things are very clear. This is webcast, so people can access this at home to be able to have a look as well. So that's also very useful. So I did speak to officers prior to this meeting, and they're fully aware of why we're bringing it and the information that they were requested to bring tonight. I've had quite a few pre-meetings with officers beforehand, just so that you're all aware. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Chair, I still want to say that I still feel that this is not the arena for this meeting. I think the decision has been made, and to a certain extent, relatives need to be very clear about what's happening, and you know, we have to be very careful not to encourage anyone to believe that the decision could be changed. It has been taken, the process is in place, and I will reiterate, this is not the right arena for this discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Vanier, for those comments. I think we're just going to move on now. So, okay, Councillor Gideon-Bull.
I'm sorry, I can't sit here and listen to that. It's not down to the Cabinet member to dictate to the Scrutiny panel or a Scrutiny committee what should and shouldn't be on the agenda. By the same token, it would be completely inappropriate for the Chair of a Scrutiny committee or the Chair of a Scrutiny panel to go to the Cabinet and tell the Chair of the Cabinet what that person could or could not have on the agenda. I understand the point that Councillor Vanier is making about managing expectation and making sure that residents understand that the decision has been taken. But it is still down to a Scrutiny panel to scrutinise exactly whatever it wants to scrutinise, whether a decision has been taken or otherwise. And for a Cabinet member to try and dictate to the contrary, I feel completely inappropriate.
I think we're just going to move on from that point. I think otherwise we might get bogged down in other stuff. So, Bev, okay, right, we'll just briefly thank you and then we'll move on to Bev Bitakis. I think there are lots of people sitting around here who just want to get on with the item. Thanks.
But I wasn't actually trying to dictate to the Chair how the meeting should be run. I was just trying to outline the fact that expectations, as you say, have to be managed. And I still stick to my point that it's inappropriate.
Well, we're just going to move on. So, Beverly, would you like to, I'm not sure if it's you or Charlotte, thank you, and then Claire, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Connors. So when we met in the pre-meet, you asked for a clarification of the decision that was taken on December the 12th, because I think you felt that there was a level of confusion about the actual decision. So I was then asked just to clarify what that decision is. I don't have a lot more to add to what Councillor Vanier has said, apart from just to expand a bit to say that the decision was taken, I believe it was December the 12th, to close Osborne on the grounds of quality and sustainability of care. It was very clear and reflected in the minutes of that meeting that closure be subject to an implementation plan that includes engagement with all stakeholders, including residents, families and carers, that there would be a reassessment of the care and support needs of residents, with a view to identifying suitable alternative provision to meet assessed needs, that individual transition plans would be sensitive to the needs of residents, mitigating the impact of the closure and ensuring that the change is safely handled and support needs of residents continued to be met. So on the 13th of December, the lead member, Councillor Vanier, actually wrote to all residents and families outlining them of the decision that was taken at Cabinet and her commitment and intention to enable officers to work closely with families to support the development of individual plans, to support the closure, and to make sure that it was handled sensitively and safely. She also outlined that that process would involve independent advocacy. And so, therefore, in keeping with the decision made by Cabinet, that is exactly what officers have started to do and commenced taking forward the implementation plans.
Are there any questions from panel members at this point around that, or shall I take questions from any relatives or... if you'd like to just introduce yourselves and say with your staff or carer, etc., just it's more helpful when we have a conversation. So if anyone would like to raise their hand if they've got a question.
Michelle Roder. Michelle Roder, resident, daughter of the resident at Osborne Grove Nursing Home. Mr. Homer, here, he's also a relative to the resident at Osborne Grove Nursing Home.
Vivian Watson. My mum's a resident at Osborne Grove Nursing Home.
Liz Chikilo, and my mom's a resident at or Osborne Grove Nursing Home.
Christine Zembler. I have a relative also at Osborne Grove, and also I've been a taxpayer in Haringey for the last 25 years. So I'm very interested in these procedures. First of all, thank you for your comments this evening, Councillor Vanier and Councillor Beverly Tarker. We've understood that there is this decision in December to close Osborne Grove, and we are completely aware of that. However, there was an options appraisal, and that was also taken at the December discussion at Cabinet. So in January, when there was another Cabinet meeting, that report was withdrawn, and we'd like to know why that was not put in front of us, because it would be beneficial for clarity for the stakeholders, the residents, the staff and the relatives at Osborne Grove. And there has not been any sort of convincing positive decision of any formal implementation plan or proper safeguarding or the legal rights for the residents and their relatives. And when the home was set up earlier on in the years of it beginning as a nursing home, there was a legal document drawn up with the CCG and the Adult Services, Section 75 agreement. I'd just like to know if that exists. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those. Should we start with the Section 75 agreement first from Claire? Thank you.
Yeah. So we have Section 75s, but the Osborne Grove Nursing Home is not part of that.
Just for clarification, if there had been one in the distant past, would that have been with the PCT, so actually not with the CCG? Is that what we're...
Potentially, yes, but it's certainly not included in the current Section 75.
Okay, would anyone like to pick up on Michelle's other comments about sort of... well, I'll just let you take those questions.
Thank you. The final recommendation on the Cabinet paper in December was to agree that the options appraisal would be brought back, would be completed and brought back to the Cabinet at the earliest opportunity, and we're still working on that options appraisal. It wasn't ready for January Cabinet. We've got a series of workshops, and we're looking to bring that back to Cabinet in June or at the earliest possible opportunity that we can when the options appraisal is completed. So we're just following the recommendation that it be completed. We want it to be full and options appraisal as possible and it be brought back to Cabinet at the earliest opportunity. It's worth noting the wording, the future use of Osborne Grove Nursing Home for nursing care. So that's the range of options that we're looking at. The future use of Osborne Grove Nursing Home for nursing care.
I suspect the question that's just run through my mind, Charlotte, has just run through lots of other people's minds. If there's options around nursing care, you're therefore suggesting that that nursing care can obviously still be provided at Osborne Grove. The $64,000 question could be, why would we be seeking, if someone else can provide that nursing care, why can't we provide it ourselves?
So there's a separate decision on the closure on the grounds of quality and sustainability of care, as Beverly said. In terms of the options, we're looking at a number of areas that we wanted to explore. So one is, as members of the panel will be aware, as colleagues from the CCG are aware, we are working with colleagues across North Central London, so that's Barnet, Enfield, Camden, Islington, as well as with ourselves, on capacity around nursing care in the North Central London region, and we're really keen to look at options for increasing capacity for nursing care across the sub-region. So that's one thing. We have previously brought to panel, and they are referenced in the report. There are a number of buildings issues and design issues with the current building. So again, we're looking at options around those. So and then we're looking at the delivery of care and the sort of service model for nursing care that there should be. So as part of the work across North Central London, for example, we're working with primary care colleagues, with community health care colleagues about what's the right model and approach to nursing care. So that's all being fed into the options appraisal as well. So that's why it's taking longer, and we're doing it in a collaborative way with partners and making sure that it's not solely about who provides it, it's about the model of nursing care, the capacity, and then about the delivery route.
Are you happy that all your questions, because I'm just going to take another one, I think you said something about the legality, or you had some questions around.
Thank you. Yes, there hasn't been a proposed formal implementation plan formally put forward to the relatives or their residents. Their legal rights have not been illustrated in front of them, and this seems to be an opaque area where there seems to be sort of some confusion about how your proposed implementation plan was supposed to proceed clearly and effectively. We've had nothing formal since the decision in December, where that's it, Osborne Grove are closing down. There's been no formal meeting with the council, office councillors at Osborne Grove, all the councillors, in not this kind of environment, but in the setting of Osborne Grove, and it just would have been, I think, really helpful for the staff, for the relatives, and most important, the residents there, as to their future. Because I feel a lot of the residents are not up to moving. They're at a point in their life where they need to be respected with some dignity and not evicted from their home.
Yeah, there's a direct question. I asked that direct question of Hale, who I met with, as what are Ruby, my mother's rights in relation to the obligations of Haringey Council that's documented, and where can I find that? And he said to contact Age UK. And I said, and I don't really know what Age UK. Now, this is a very direct question. I was very, very direct. And so I went back to Hale and Ron Atkins. Actually, I'd asked Kathy originally, but Ron Atkins was CC'd and he answered it. And I said, that's helpful. Are you implying that Age UK, who is a national organisation, that all councils have the same policies, but surely there must be some kind of documentation that says what Ruby's rights are at Haringey Council that you could just point me to, and it's a really transparent thing, and I think that follows on what Michelle says, and I haven't had a response back.
That'd be useful to clarify that point. So, Beverly.
Thank you for your questions. And first of all, I just want to acknowledge that I appreciate the sort of distress that you're obviously experiencing and the anxiety following such a decision to close Osborne Grove. We've taken a very individual approach to supporting all the residents at Osborne. So there are a social worker and also a nurse from the clinical commissioning group actually working individually with individuals and their families to support the implementation plan and the move-on plans. The independent advocate is there on offer to support that process as well. So each person's plan is very, very individual. Where appropriate, and it's in most of the cases, we have to have up-to-date GP support and advice to inform decision-making. As we said earlier, we follow guidance as laid out and put together by organisations such as ADAS, that's the Association for Directors of Adult Social Care, the Care Quality Commission, Health Watch, etc. It's good. It's basically quality guidance of how you actually, step by step, going about supporting the closure of a care home and maintaining the safety of residents. And that is something that's implemented. We have a small working group that's been put together. Many of the people in that group are the staff of Osborne. Caroline Humphreys, for example, the registered manager of Osborne, and also the safeguarding lead from the CCG, as well as our commissioning colleagues, who are supporting the closure and the move of residents. It is very individual, so there is no holistic overarching plan. We pledged earlier to go at that individual person-centred place, and that's exactly what I'm overseeing, to ensure that's done as sensitively and as safely as possible.
Just to follow up on the rights of people who currently are there, is there anywhere that any information that we have on a Haringey site somewhere, what patients or relatives or clients' rights are?
I have met with Patricia at the CCG, is that it is? And Wayne. They keep calling me on my phone, so I've had to ask, it was on Wednesday, if Patricia could email me, because it's more convenient to have, still don't have Wayne's email, I've asked for that. Because it's good to have things in writing, and it's also good to remind yourself what you've said, not just for them, but for yourself, to see if you've asked for something that's not clear or something. From when I asked Patricia about the rights, she says that's not their domain. So should I speak? She says maybe you speak to Kathy, but then it comes back to Kathy and Ron at Hale and going back to Age UK. So there's obviously not a transparent process going on that I would like to, or the guidance that you're saying that's happening on an individual level. I'm not experiencing that on an individual level. Yeah.
So I'm happy to ensure that all residents get a written documentation of the approach we are taking, including the assessment that I've talked about with the clinical support as required, the requirement to have a best interests meeting where families are actually involved in that meeting.
Why are we choosing the care home for them to move to before we have that meeting? Why was I given the pressure to choose a care home, to go and look at care homes? And I think that this is a common theme. Why is that happening before we're having the advice and that caring one-to-one?
So the decision has been made to close the home, and that's how our officers and our practitioners are proceeding. That's the Constitution. A cabinet decision was made to close the home. The processes that have been put in place are to deliver on that cabinet decision.
I know what you're saying, but if you're using the argument and the rationale that the process is transparent and it's caring, then it doesn't follow logic that the pressure to choose a care home should be happening before the caring procedure.
Sorry, I didn't quite understand your comment. That shouldn't be happening if you or your cared for person feels that there's pressure. I need to respond to that. So I will talk to my officers to make sure that pressure is not being put on individuals. There is a process. There's a whole sort of guidance for how we should go about things, and I'm happy for that to be shared with you. Yeah. So I will ensure that that's shared. Yeah.
Sorry, as a business owner, and I own buildings where I'm renting out things, and I have an issue with your term of closure. I'm not convinced it's the right move. you have a facility, which, in case you don't know, is a lovely building, ideal for people who are slowly going into dementia. You have 4 wings with a lovely common room for each wing, and each wing has maybe 4 beautiful bedrooms with fit bathroom. I don't know what part of not fit I cannot understand. I have dealt with real estate, older people places in the United States and in France, both. This is the 3rd, but I've been here 25 years. I'd be happy to go, maybe in 20 years, to this facility. I think it's beautiful. It doesn't smell bad. The staff is dedicated, lovely, and my relatives who had a stroke and was probably given a few months, she's been there over 10 years. So don't tell me this is not a dedicated staff and the building is fit for purpose. Now, where my question is, as a business owner, would I leave half my apartments empty? Because this is what I'm looking at Osborne Grove. The entire top floor not used, or half of the building not used for the past two years. You have beds empty, rooms empty. Some of the staff, you've cut down on your staff. I would love to look at, if it's public, I would love to look at your bottom line and the accounts, because you have reduced the staff, and some of them are overworked. I don't know what the ratios are, but there are times when I'm looking in there, and your staff never complains. But I just don't understand why is this place closing? It's in the center of an area where access for a lot of people. You could have beds for people who are on the outskirts of Haringey, or because they can come in with the train. Finsbury Park is walking distance. Now, I would love to I would love to see those. Are these public? The accounts, are they public?
Yeah, you can just switch. No.
I hear the points you're making, but with regard to the building, the decision was made in May, the decision to close. So, sorry, in December, I beg your pardon. Yeah. I am one of the members of the Cabinet.
Just tease out, Charlotte, this nursing options appraisal. If it's going to a new cabinet that will be formed after the next election, would it be possible for the options appraisal to include the continuing of Osborne Grove in its current state, and therefore proposing to reverse the decision that the cabinet's taken, given that we're coming quite close to the end of this administration, and I'm not quite clear in my mind what the date is for actual closure of Osborne Grove and how many people there. I do admit that I haven't been to Osborne Grove. I've been past it quite a lot, but I haven't actually been to quite. So no, I didn't. I'm not a member of the cabinet, madam, so I didn't vote on it. I wouldn't be a member of the cabinet because I wouldn't have supported this proposal. But we'll put that to one side for the time being. Can I ask? You've said about nursing options appraisal. What residents and users are thinking? I'm still trying to get my head round what possible options appraisals there will be, what possible options there will be for Osborne Grove that would be nursing provision, and why the council couldn't provide that nursing care in Osborne Grove. That's what I'm trying to get my head round. Okay, so my question is then, the most important question is, given that we've already accepted, and I know the reason why it's not going to come to a cabinet before the election. I've had a discussion in other forums with regards to that. Couldn't one of those options be put to a new cabinet of reversing the decision to close Osborne Grove?
In terms of the options appraisal, we're looking at 3 things, I think. As I said before, one is the model of care, One is capacity and trying to increase capacity, and the final one is the delivery model. We're looking at a range of options for that, both as regards the site, as regards what the medication model would be, how primary care will be engaged, those sorts of things, and what the delivery model will be. I feel, although I'm no lawyer and there's no lawyer present, that it would not be for the options appraisal to go back to the decision previously. That would be a separate, if that were taken, that would be a separate decision that wouldn't be in the options appraisal. Sorry, as Beverly was saying, and she might want to elaborate further, but there was no date given for closure as such, because the approach was taken that it should be a person-centred approach, so based on the needs of each resident and transition planning for those residents. So there wasn't a date for closure. It was based on a process, as was being discussed here, of assessment, of working with relatives and users on options for transition arrangements, and that the closure would take place after that process was finished.
Before we move on to further questions, I'd like to bring Claire in here after Councillor Benny, but I'll just ask Claire, because I'd just like a little bit more elaboration about, and I think we've had questions come up tonight about why we're not specifically using all the area and what the difficulties might be for this as a standalone council-run facility compared to other nursing homes which are in different sectors, you know, obviously private sector or other sectors. So I'd just like a little bit more information, because I know we've spoken, well, I've spoken to colleagues of yours about this, so I think it'd be really useful to get that information now, to give a bit more clarity about why only parts of this is being used and that sort of thing. Councillor Fanny, did you want to come in before Claire, or do you want to come in after Claire?
With regard to the closure decision that Councillor Ball commented on, when the decision was made in December, there is a period of time for backbench members, if they do not agree with the decision, to have a call-in. I do not recall members having a call-in on that decision. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Can you, I won't let that one go, Councillor Venue. Could you tell me in the last number of, I don't know, the last 10 years, how many call-ins have resulted in the Cabinet actually overturning the original decision?
Okay, so in terms of, I guess, just setting out the CCG involvement, so Clinical Commissioning Group, our quality assurance team has essentially been working with Osborne Grove and as they do other providers across Haringey. So we have teams of nurses, pharmacists and so on whose role is advisory. They work, so they don't regulate, but they certainly support our providers in the borough to look at quality improvement. And I know they've worked quite significantly over the last couple of years, in particular with Osborne Grove. And that's around looking at clinical practice, providing training and support, working with CQC, and very closely with social care teams. And I suppose one of the things we would say about care homes generally, so you asked about why it would be difficult possibly for the council to continue. I guess the experience is that care homes today are dealing with very complex needs, and to be a standalone home, if you like, can be a challenge in terms of providing the wider support that care homes need. So where we have many care homes, they have sort of, quality assurance teams themselves who will work across sites. Staff will be able to rotate to different sites and therefore learn sort of best practice, keep their skills up. and get that support from a much wider network that a lot of homes have. So I guess that would be one of the challenges that could possibly face. But that's not, if you like, you know, it's not the CCG's decision what happens. And in terms of why the home, all the rooms aren't used, I don't know. Oops, sorry.
Thank you. We're going to take, because Councillor Adam has been sitting here very quietly and patiently, and then I think, Michelle, you've had your hand up, and Councillor Bull.
I want to make a comment and then say something about the future. This is, I think, to the director. I mean, in my experience, when in the past the council closed residential homes and they moved people, some of those people die, and because all the people, you know, they don't, not just older, but you know, not well and fragile, they don't do well in moving, and some of them die. So how do you make sure that doesn't happen? You know, as much as one can, of course, you know, it doesn't happen. And the question I have is as well, are they going to move in Haringey, you know, or are they going to be out of the borough? That's the issue, because a lot of families who want to have them, you know, in Haringey if possible, so they can visit. I mean, everybody knows that I'm not happy about this. It's been going on for some time, and I've been around here long enough to remember when we had a residential home there for the Cypriot people. The argument at the time was to demolish it. It didn't work, it was too expensive, demolish it, we needed a nursing home. The other services, or social services as it was called then, spent a lot of money to rebuild a nursing home. And, you know, we're all very happy to have it, of course, you know. Now you said that it may happen again. You know, they were looking at maybe demolition because it's not, the building is not big enough for a nursing home and so on. My question is, who is going to pay for this? Is it the council who is going to pay for the demolition of the new building? Is the council going into a partnership with somebody else? And who is to say that a few years down the road, we're not back in square one, you know? This is not... The problem is this home has been allowed to deteriorate. Then when the inspection came in, and you know the history, I don't have to repeat it here, that's why we have empty beds and so on. Then instead of trying to... I know the director tried very hard recently, you know, to recover, the home to recover, but I think it was left a bit too late. Instead of putting the resources and the energy to make sure the home was working properly, it was allowed to deteriorate. So what do? Close it, demolish it, do something else. But I am a bit cynical on that, you know, and we don't have enough nursing homes in Haringey, and we have one, it should be working perfectly all right. And if it's not big enough, the question is why didn't they build a bigger one? At the time, we spent millions of pounds for a nursing home. You know, I don't know the questions, but really, if I was a relative and I had somebody there, I'd be announced as well. I'd be screaming blue matter. I'd be standing here day and night. But there you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Adamu. If I could address the first part of the question about the safety of residents in terms of the closure and the move. To date, that has included, but it's not been limited to, the involvement of GPs, advanced care plan nurses, dietitians, the support of the CCG personnel that Claire referred to earlier. And as I said earlier, the very individual approach is taken to each individual in terms of their support plan. I think the question about the building is probably best.
Thank you.
So a range of options are being put before residents and their families and carers in terms of the potential move on
in terms of the building, as I mentioned, we have brought before panel before some of the issues about the design of the building, and I appreciate that it wasn't very long ago that the building was designed and built, but there are a number of design issues with the building, which we could rehearse here, but include things like the size of the lift, the visibility and staffing levels required for each of the 4 wings, and some issues arising from fire risk assessments over a period. So that is taken into account in the options appraisal. I don't think I mentioned demolition, but we are looking at all options in terms of using the site as effectively and efficiently as we can, given that, as you've pointed out, we have limited number of nursing care beds in the borough, and we want to, where possible, maximise the use we can make in the borough. And we want to do that with a building that is as safe and well designed and able to work for the future as we can. So those issues will be teased out in the options appraisal, and clearly those are finely balanced judgments that we would need to take and that we would need to recommend to Cabinet, because clearly there are issues about if we were to look at increasing the capacity on the site, there might be some benefits to that. We know that that many care homes find it very difficult to operate on a 32-bed basis. It's fairly small size for a care home. So in terms of sort of economic viability, we need to look at that in the future. So there'll be a number of issues that are teased out in the options appraisal, and there'll be a judgment about how those work as part of the options appraisal, and a recommendation would be put forward. But I think I just wanted to highlight that there are some issues with the current building, and whilst it isn't, appreciate it has only been built within the last 10 years or so, and it looks a very fine building, and I appreciate it's got land around it, etc. There are some actually fundamental design issues with the building that we would want to address if we were looking at an options appraisal for future use of the site.
I've got a few people who've been indicating for some time. I've got Councillor Bull, Councillor Brabazon, I've got Michelle. There was still a question actually that you raised about the finances, and we didn't actually get that answer. So I'm just going to clarify that now. Is there a public document about the financial spend or what's
I would like to have a clarification if anybody assessed them. It seems to me that there's a fundamental management problem in running that place.
Yeah, because the staff is
because it's a clear case as underused and inefficiency, and to see it's heartbreaking. I mean, I know there's a human cost involved here. I'm not just looking at finances, not just because I have an MBA, I'm just always looking at numbers, but there is a human cost involved in the decision that was made behind closed doors, and really without a proper financial assessment of somebody with a business profile looking into the figures, because it's just mind-boggling that it's the inefficiency of the building. I'd like to to question your assessment of the building. I have dealt in both sides, and everyone in the medical field is going, especially when you're dealing with dementia patients, is moving towards small units. So actually this building, and I really, really encourage you to go and visit it, I don't know. What do you want a hospital setting? Do you want, because these, as I'm telling you honestly, I would love, in 20 years, I'm 60 now, I would gladly go straight there. I mean, I'd buy my ticket right now to go to that place. And I can go anywhere, but I would like to get the financials assessed.
I think there's a slight frustration here, and I'm not saying this is anyone's fault. I think this is just the way it's happened. Unfortunately, the options appraisal has come out quite a distance from the decision to close. So I think all this information may be a lot more apparent come the summer when all this is happening, and unfortunately there is quite now as well you've said, but unfortunately it's just out of sync in a way, just because I think it would give a lot more information to people just around what is going forward. Maybe not to change anything now, but just to see what the options are. But just to come back, is the financial information, I have no idea actually, so I'm asking that. Do we release as a council information on specific sites in the finance part? And we haven't got anyone from the finance team here, so I'm going to have to ask Beverly.
So the honest answer, I don't know. I'm happy to go away and check whether that's possible.
I've just never been asked that before, so that was a very interesting question. Thank you. So Councillor Bull, Councillor Brabazon and Michelle.
Charlotte, can you just go on record and confirm that one of the options within the options appraisal is not to demolish it and replace it with housing?
So as stated in the recommendations from the Cabinet paper, the options we're looking at are for the future use of Osborne Grove Nursing Home for nursing care. So no, we're not looking at options for housing on that site. Just to be clear, we're not looking at options for housing on that site, we're looking at options for nursing care on that site.
Mr Brabazon and then Michelle.
Chair, I would think that the budget was perfectly public because the council publishes its accounts annually. Also, if you were to FOI it, I don't see how the council could refuse to publish a budget of the cost. You don't know names, it's just financial information. So I would suggest that it would be public information and that should be provided to people if they want it. So without having to do an FOI, I might add. On that point, I do have a number of questions, and thank you for allowing me to come. I did get interested in this because I had to cover a meeting for Councillor Hearn when there was the residents' meeting when this first came up, when it was consulted, and I did make a point coming to this meeting because I do feel that there are several issues here which need addressing. The first thing I want to say is that listening to the questions from the families, it doesn't appear to me that people are being given the information about their legal rights as a framework. And I would ask, I don't see how you can consult on something so hugely complex and intricate where there's a myriad of legal stuff to do with I've taken the opportunity to try and read a little bit about the Mental Capacity Act, the Care Act, all this legislation which surrounds all of this, where surely people should be given a fact pack as a matter of good practice and rights, not to say that you would be happy to give it, which is what I wrote down, Beverly. Instead, it should be given to people. The Council, the Cabinet, Councillor Vanier said quite clearly, a decision has been made. Well, when you make a decision, other people have rights. And the residents have real rights, huge amount of legal rights, as far as I can see. And I don't understand why residents aren't being given, the families given a proper pack, which includes all the information, where they can go, what they need to know, how you can respond, and in fact even possibly if you have issues about that, because this is a minefield of legal rights, the court protection, all these things. I mean, I can say all the words, I can't say I understand all of it, but actually I would be worried that the council would lay itself open to quite a lot of legal challenge if you do it incorrectly. So that's my first point, Chair, that I would like to raise. The second point I want to raise is that I understand the staff have been served redundancy notices. They've received letters regarding their employment. Now, I'm really worried about this because it seems to me that will end up encouraging staff to either leave or take redundancy or go because they're frightened they're going to lose their jobs. Once that happens, the whole thing goes into a spiral. and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because the place can't be run. I don't have an MBA, but, and I listened to this lady very carefully, talking about the staffing and so on. The places like Osborne Grove run on consistent good staffing. We've heard from her that people are getting good care. The CQC report, although it was critical in the first one, now for the last one anyway, so that was improving. And certainly from the times I've been there 2 or 3 times now, seeing really caring staff. But if staff leave, you're going to have to get an agency staff because we have to keep it running. We, Haringey, are going to have an obligation. We can't leave people uncared for. So what will we do? Bring in agency staff who don't know the residents, the most vulnerable people? I wouldn't be living there if they weren't vulnerable. I just cannot put my head round how this can be managed in a way, except that it appears to me to be honestly frank, and I think we have to be frank because this is so serious. This is a war of attrition now. We wear it down, and then it becomes, we will end up saying, oh, it's unsafe. And that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that is not the way, it seems to me, to be running a sensitive process. I feel very strongly about this. I've seen it happen in other settings. Adults, that's dissimilar from children's when it comes to things like that. Because once the staff fall apart, what the family's going to do. So that's my, I'd like to know how you're going to manage that. If you're going to encourage staff to take redundancy while people are living there. I frankly don't understand the role of CCG in this at all, and I'd have thought you would have a role. I didn't understand your quality assurance role at all, but surely you would be concerned as a commissioning body about that impact on the residents. The other thing I'd like to say is about advocacy. Has the Council commissioned Hale to undertake the advocacy? If they have, how does this work? I'd be very interested to know how this advocacy process works. Since the people living there are frail and may not have capacity, how does it work? Who do they talk to? Who gets assessed? Where, when, how? Who's sitting in the room? How is it documented? And what if the families aren't happy with Hale? Can they have an independent advocate? Will the council pay for that? Because if that all goes wrong, I would be worried as a councillor that we'll end up in court. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brosnan. So a series of questions there. If I could start with the staffing issue. There have been no reductions in staff. We've started a consultation with staff in terms of implementing the decision made by Cabinet back in December. That consultation will run for 45 days. That 45 days consultation. No. It's a consultation period based on the decision to close Osborne, which was started in January. The period of that statutory consultation is 45 days. That doesn't mean to say at the end of 45 days that there would be no staff there. So just to make clear, there have been no reduction in staff. I think at earlier meetings I've explained how we've actually got supernumerary staff in place at Osborne because of the concerns around quality and care grounds. And I suppose I want to give you some assurance that we will ensure that the needs of the residents that are there are uppermost in our mind, and we have a duty to ensure that there's proper and appropriate staffing levels to support residents.
I've run redundancy processes when I worked for Haringey. You do it, and then people say they put in to go, and then they go. So you can't keep them if they say they want to go, because you're inviting them to go by virtue of doing the consultation. So then how can you have consistent staffing? And in this type of setting, surely consistent staffing is everything. It just doesn't seem logical to me. And I think the whole thing is being done back to front. You should have done your option appraisal first, included in which is keeping it open, which is what I saw on a list. And then there should be a discussion, not implement a closure first, then do an option appraisal, because you've already closed off one of the options, which is to keep it open. But going back to the staff, by the very fact of consulting with staff, some staff will think, I'm going to lose my job, I better start looking. That is just human nature. And if I ask the staff that, I bet you that is exactly what they'll tell me. And once you do that, you're on the slippery slope of not having staff. Then you'll call in the agency and the CQC will come and they'll say, oh, it's all very inconsistent. So I don't understand how we can do that. And the budget will go up because the agency.
I'm not sure what else I can say apart from the fact that we are following a process. We have due regard to the needs of the residents. I suppose the facts to re-emphasise, there has been no reduction in staff, albeit there's been a 50% reduction in the number of residents currently at, more than 50% reduction in the number of residents currently at Osborne. There has been no reduction in staff. So there are currently 15 residents at Osborne. We've actually, as I've stated previously, got supernumerary staff, additional staff in place in order to safeguard and keep people safe. The transitions will be carefully managed. They are being carefully managed, and we will adjust staffing levels accordingly as they are reduced.
About how you are managing a consultation with people who, by definition, may not understand what is happening because they are in Osborne Grove, because they are very fragile. I'm not saying everybody's got dementia, but people... So could you go back to that and how that is managed, who's involved in the meetings, what the actual process is, and also this whole issue about providing people with, not as a matter of, I'd be happy to do it, but we are closing it, here are your legal rights, we are operating a proper formal, it's a formal process. People need to know.
So I've said previously, I will provide that in writing, the actual processes that is actually taking place now. I know that I've got staff in there taking through residents and families individually through those plans. Where people do not have capacity, we have independent mental capacity advocates, which we also commission, that are brought in to support the process. So that's separate from the independent advocate from HALE. We have specific INCUBs that support that process. In terms of, you wanted to know about the contract with HALE? Did you want to know about the contract with?
If families weren't happy with HALE and what their role is and how that all works. You've said they're independent mental capacity advocates, and I'll be interested to know what the family's experience has been, but let's hear what you have to say.
We've commissioned HALE. If there are issues about HALE as a provider, we would need to know them so that we can act on them either with HALE to address those or to look at an alternative provider if it got to that point, but we would need to know from people that it wasn't working and to have concerns raised with us.
Necessarily about whether, I don't know whether they're good or bad or indifferent, I have no idea, but it is about whether the families want to have an independent advocate and how that works. And my main point about all of this is how the actual process of communicating with people who may not be able to communicate, who are at the centre of this, because that's what we say, it's person-centred care. And when it's all surrounded by a myriad of legal processes and legal rights, which, if they are not done properly, could land the council, I'd have thought, in some serious legal disputes or, mired, let's say.
So sorry, I think I misunderstood your question on that basis. So as Beverly said, where individuals don't have capacity, we can bring in an independent mental capacity advocate. We have the option of taking up independent advocacy through HALE, which is available to everyone. Clearly, family and other people in the network can act as advocates for their loved one, and they do there, and that's why they're involved in the process. So as Beverly said, the best interest assessment process, for example, is a process which involves the user, family members or people in people's networks to ensure that the best interest decision is reached for that individual. So there's there's no requirement to use the independent advocate. The independent advocate is there to support residents if they feel they would like to take up that offer. There's no requirement to use it.
Yeah, I'm going to come back in. There still hasn't been any mention of what the legal processes are or advice to be given. So I don't know what that would be. I think Councillor Brabazon has raised some under different acts. But is there any specific information that we can provide from Haringey or another body that we are associated with in order to give that, and I think you call it a fact pack, which is a very, but you know, in order to be able to give to people so they are completely aware of their rights, the rights of their relatives, etc., going forward in this process.
Beverly has said that she will provide information on the process. As part of that, that is the information about what people can expect, what...
As a representative of my mother, I can say that I've asked for that information, and the process that you've provided with Hale is not working. And also, when Patricia, the nurse, was assessing, talking to me about assessing Ruby, they needed the doctor to assess her to see if she was fit to move. So my mother's got very, very bad dementia, just so you know the context of this. She moved into Osborne Grove in 2010, and at that time they said that she would probably not live a few months. And now we are in 2018, so that's a testament of her good care. She's probably going to go to the end where she loses the ability to swallow. So she's asphyxiating regularly, but the staff are so good there, they can catch it so she doesn't have to go to the Whittington. So they can put a nebulizer on her for a couple of hours one day when they sense it. You know, so they're finely tuned to Ruby. Okay, so they said that the doctor would assess Ruby to see if she could move. Oh, but Patricia said it's a shame. The doctor's on paternity leave, so I don't know when that's going to happen. This is on a Friday. By Tuesday morning, she had an assessment that the doctor said that she could be moved. And I said, well, how did that happen? I thought he was on paternity leave. It was going to take a few weeks. And she said that he saw her 2 months ago and said that she could be moved. And I said, well, for a woman in her condition, and she is deteriorating, I don't think 2 months is... It needs to be more recent. And so then they've rescheduled it, but they told me that her doctor's appointment on Tuesday was on Wednesday. And so I couldn't go to it because I was working for something that's quite important. It seems quite random that it happens all of a sudden. And then, so I don't know if the process is actually... For something so important, normally it wouldn't matter. She could see a GP any time without me being there. But I think this is a very important one, isn't it? So.
Okay, so this question is really about how information is communicated, both from...
The question is about quality control. So you're saying those processes are in place, but how, you know, I think it's a bit loose about the quality to ensure to put the patient first and their needs in the context of what's happening. Yeah.
Can I say, Chair, I have been aware of some of the concerns, and I am in the process of organising a meeting to speak with residents and families about some of the issues that you're raising at the moment. That's in the process of being done now, so obviously I will liaise to get the best time so that it'll be convenient for families as well to attend.
Just so we're clear, how soon would we be able to get that sorted so that they would know? So if they hadn't heard in a few days or a week, they would know.
My support office is actually working on it now.
I would imagine that'd be soon then, hopefully. But I'll just, it's interesting that I mean, I completely understand that you're going to go into Osborne Grove and have that conversation directly with all people, but just because it's a point that's been raised here tonight and it's just about process, if concerns are raised, can they email someone directly? Could they, if you in the future have concerns, who would be the best point of contact for that in the process, not sort of specific care things, but just in that process?
I can give the name and the email address of the person in overall charge of that, so they can be contacted. So that can go out with the yeah.
Okay, so thank you. That's been noted, and that's going to go into this fact pack. I think I'm going to call it that. There were other questions. I think, Councillor Brabazon, has yours been finished? Yeah. Okay. Was there any other? Because Michelle, but I think there's some people sitting at the table who haven't actually spoken yet. So do you want to ask anything? Because you've been sitting there very quietly. Was there anything you wanted to raise as you've come all this way? Oh.
No, a lot of my colleagues here have brought up a lot of my concern, and the email was one of the things, rather than people phoning all the time. I do shift work, and I can be up as early as 3 o'clock in the morning to go to work, and I can be home at 2 o'clock in the morning. So I have someone to email, because I never know where I'm going to be at the time. So that was important to me.
But you also said about your family that it's a violent decision.
Yeah, because the thing is, although it's only me here tonight, my mum has got 7 children, so it's not just my decision. It's my other siblings as well, and they really don't want her moved. So.
On behalf of Mr. Homer here, he's given me permission to speak on behalf of him. He's 90, and his wife and him have been married for over 40 years, and he's not happy about his wife, who's more or less, a very sensitive part of her life. He doesn't want her moved. She might be moved out to the back end of Potter's Bar. And how is he supposed to get from there? He lives in North London. Yeah, sorry, I haven't finished. And Osborne Grove was put together with a CCG team and an adult service team, council, and you all collectively got permission to build this building, which was safe, otherwise you wouldn't have allowed people in there. And further down the line, an embargo was put on. I think Councillor Brabazon made a point of it just, people, I don't know, fell asleep at the wheel, and there was an embargo and people weren't allowed to come back in. And then it didn't pass the CQC, so it's definitely got the green light for closing down. And I really don't believe that there's a solution where we can't move forward on it. There are a group of intelligent people who said, yes, let's open up a nursing home. And then, Charlotte, about 20 minutes ago, you said it's still got the option appraisals for keeping it as a nursing home. So why are we closing it down, moving people out, bringing about their demise to open it back up again? There's no logic. It's just a waste of energy and time where we can just build on what we have.
Right, so there's one question there about, what was it? Communication, and I think for how your wife and how that communication is happening and how you're involved in that. And I think that might be addressed by Beverly. And then the other question was more about, and I'm just wondering actually if Claire, you can come in a little bit on what happened with why, because it was a 2-year period, wasn't it, from the start of something going wrong to the point we're at. And are there any lessons that that you have learned? And because obviously this is something that we certainly wouldn't want to happen again. And that's because we've got the CQC, you've got Margaret from the CQC sitting here, and it's really about, so when something requires improvement like this, and we've noted there's quite a lot of other homes that require improvement, what's the sort of time frame that would normally happen that you would go back in to assess again and to see, because I'm just sort of thinking that just by pure chance, and you're not the person I know, but CQC go in 2 weeks and reassess it, what happens then, and how does that work? So it's just really the CQC's inputs, but I'll go with Claire first. Thank you.
Okay, so as I said, we have a quality assurance team, and largely made up of nurses, and they support all our providers with clinical care. So looking at a sort of summary of the last 2 years, so they made over 30 visits to the home in 2015, and that was a mix of looking at sort of doing some monitoring visits, meeting with the staff, providing some training, and raising areas of concern. In 2017, another 45 visits were carried out, and I think that demonstrates the, if you like, the concerns that the staff had, and the commitment to providing the sort of ongoing support to the home in order to support quality improvement. And I know that they worked with CQC, so they'll have talked, of course, to senior managers within the council in terms of their findings, recommendations, and so on. And they also raised issues with the CQC. And the sorts of things that I guess they were raising, so in some of the themes in 2017 were around medicines management, so how medicines were kept, recorded, and so on. Record keeping, so of course, you know, lots of people have very complex needs, and the need to have clear records, very important. And then some issues around skills in sort of risk management and care planning. So those sorts of things were picked up as some of the themes for last year.
Is there anything, because obviously that's taken over quite a long period of time, and I think some of the frustrations have been that I've spoken to, because I have been to Osborne Grove a couple of occasions, and it's been, well, if we knew there were problems, how come they weren't nipped in the bud? And is there a moment of learning to think that was a moment where you could have nipped it in the bud, or are you saying these problems were so endemic that actually it took 2 years and we are where we are?
I can't say if it was endemic. I think throughout this process we've tried to, as we always do, support the staff, support the managers, and escalate as appropriate, because the most important thing is trying to look at improving the patient care, keeping the patient safe, and of course this is a very important resource, you know, for local people, for the CCG, and for the local authority. And so really it's about how much support, you know, we needed to put in, and we'll continue to do so.
So Margaret, so just from a general knowledge, not specifically on Osborne Grove, but I don't know, and so I'm asking the question. So if a home has gone up and requires improvement, how quickly do the CQC normally go back in?
Generally speaking, we would go back in within 12 months, but that is very generally speaking. I know with Osborne we've been there 3 times since December 16 to July 17. And our last visit, we did actually remove them from special measures, so we did see significant improvement. And on that basis, generally speaking, unless we get information to suggest otherwise, we would revisit within 12 months of the report being published. And that report was actually published in September of last year. So within 12 months of that publication, unless we get information to suggest there are increasing concerns, and that could be from a range of sources, from the CCG, it could be from a number of complaints, it could be from safeguarding issues, from other stakeholders. So it very much depends on the information we get, but generally speaking, within 12 months.
So that 12 months, that's a year, so with a home that requires improvement. So that indicates to me that although, yes, there's a need for that to happen, it's not at a point where you're saying people shouldn't be in there and be cared for. Is that correct? Is that, because I'm just sort of trying to work out what, you know, because we at the moment don't put people into a home that requires improvement, even if it's on the up. So it's just really an understanding from the CQC's point of view as to your position on that.
A home that requires improvement is a home where things need to be, as the rating suggests, improved. But on that basis, we are not saying it's not a place that's safe for people to be in. If a home was unsafe, we would take action depending on what we found, so urgent action or a more slower route. So we could take a variety of different actions against a provider if the home was found to be unsafe. And in that case, a home would generally be rated inadequate. Or we could go in and find something of significant concern on a visit, which would immediately cause us to take urgent action. But generally, a home requiring improvement, we want to see improvement. We want to work with providers to improve the quality of care and get that rating up to good or outstanding.
Right. Are there any further questions from panel members or from members of the public that have come tonight to, because I hope what we've done tonight is give you a bit more information straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, so that you've heard directly from officers who are responsible and everyone in the room. So what I've gleaned from tonight is that there will be, as Beverly said, written information given out to everybody in relation to all the different timelines for everything, how this all should be taking place, email details for you to contact if there are any issues, and any legal or other advice that you might require. And that will all be provided to you as a documentation via Adult Social Care. So it's Beverly Tarker, who's the Director of Adult Social Care. Information on finance, I'm sure we can provide to you because it sounds logical. So I'm not saying we're definitely, but I think that's can be gleaned. And I think, to be honest, that's as much information as I think we've gleaned from tonight. In putting it in a nutshell, Councillor Brabazon, anything else?
Is the issue about staffing? I'm not sure what should be provided, but I would like it recorded that there does seem to be a sort of dissonance, Chair, between wanting to make sure everything's fine and issuing redundancy notices which inevitably destabilise the staff. And listening to the lady from the CQC, that does worry me because this centre has been improving. And so the issues, the act of issuing a 188, have you issued a 188? Have you issued a section 188?
Consultation at the moment. It started in January. We're still consulting with staff. Yeah.
Issuing of consulting with staff, which might then lead to the formal processes, in and of itself destabilises the staff. And I don't know whether the families want to comment on that, but that would just seem to be illogical to me. And I think, Chair, that really needs to be recorded. I don't know, it's not really a question, it's an observation, because you're trying to look after the people, but the staff may not be there.
Take one. Sorry, Johnson.
Can I just make a request on that officially? That I think what you summed up about it being back to front, that we turn the process around and get the options appraisal first. Is that possible? I just really want to, as you know, get that down, then talk to the patients and their families, put everything else on hold till that, then talk to the staff. It just seems, I think, I really can't strongly request that enough and see if any kind of action could be done on that. Yeah.
I think the difficulty is that obviously they've had the thing to close. So the options appraisal can't, you know, that bit is going to be coming out when they've got the information. And I think that was the point I was making earlier. It does seem a little bit strange that we've had a closure, but without the options appraisal, almost part and parcel, because then that would have given us better information. Also, sort of working with the CQC and an understanding of whether there was a direct working with the CQC about how the improvement could continue. I think all that is part of that, but that's now happened. That decision has been made through Cabinet, and I'm to be honest, I don't know what information they had specifically around all of that to make that decision, but that has been made. So I think the options appraisal to come out now, I think the difficulty is that Charlotte said it'll be in the summer when they've got all the information. I don't know why that's the time frame for it, but that's what we've been given. So I suppose then you'd have that, and then you'd have to have... So the options to close would then need, I assume, a Cabinet member or somebody or some decision to say it's on pause while we have the options appraisal and we have everything else. I'm going to go to the Cabinet member because I don't know how that would work, and she's here, so I shall ask Councillor Vanier on that specific question. And and I think we'll finish.
Could you repeat the question?
So, as a Cabinet, could you, if you decided that actually you did want the options appraisal before you then moved forward with the discussions with staff and relatives and residents there, could you potentially, as a Cabinet, make that decision to pause the closure, or is that not an option?
It's not an option.
Ask why that's not an option for transparency.
For transparency, the process already started taking place. Consultation is taking place at the moment with regard to the options appraisal. As Charlotte said, the options appraisal is not ready and is not going to be ready for some time. However, the decision has been made to close, and the process is taking place now.
For someone that's a general public, could you explain exactly why that is impossible to happen? Just so I know. I'm not saying about not closing Osborne Grove. I am saying about the change of order for people's benefits, and that's staff and family included. So that I'm just exactly asking, for someone who's not a council person, can you explain simply why that is not possible? Not a yes or no. It's like a parent saying to their kid, don't do that because I told you not to do it. It's just not logical. There needs to be something behind it.
And who votes on it?
Yeah.
It will have to go back to Cabinet.
Right, Councillor Bull, did you want to say anything? Okay. So I think that's the answer. There you go.
So how do we go back to Cabinet?
Yes.
In terms of the timetable, the decision, we haven't really got enough time at the moment to be able to get to a stage to make that decision in terms of a reversal. It will have to be a Cabinet meeting. There aren't, as far as I'm aware, there's only 2 more Cabinet meetings left, which won't be time to have a proper discussion and look at that decision. And we are moving into PERDA. So in effect, it would be a decision, if at all, for the next administration.
Sorry, what's PERDA, and what is time? What we won't have time for? What is won't have time for PERDA, or?
PERDA is, as this is an election year, a local election year, after the 26th of March, no decisions can be made by the council until after the election. Whichever administration comes in May will then be able to start making key decisions. And at this juncture, there isn't time for that to take place.
So what prevents us from waiting? Since it's such a hot issue,
Why don't we just wait? Yeah.
it seems to me it's to your benefit if everything is clear on the table and we just wait so everybody has a chance to, we look at the finances, we see where the problem is. Is it a management problem? Because it doesn't seem to be a staff problem, the staff at the, carers level. So are we looking at a management problem? Are we looking, I'm not against looking at it in a financial situation where you have a lovely building, and I would love to see the report on what they found that's not appropriate for care. And I would be willing to look at that building, at that site. I agree with you that it's underutilized. It could be a development on the side. You could develop, multi-care. You could develop, child care. It's been proven to improve the children's and the elderly people. So I'm not against looking at developing the site, but to penalize the most vulnerable in your community, I think it's a crime, because you're attacking the weakest of the weakest.
Sorry, can I just ask, is there a way that we could... Oh, there we go. Is there a way we can request officially that we wait till after the end of March before this PERDA, that everything's put on hold? No, there's nothing that the families can do to request that, or...
I think, to be honest, that's a councillor decision, so it would need to come from, and I'm just speaking here that I think this is the situation, that it would need to go through the Labour group, and they would then have to ask their colleagues, who are the cabinet members, to do this. So it would have to come from, and that's sort of just the process of it, because not officers' decisions. So although officers have been very clear tonight that they're working to this time frame, but the time frame was put in place because this decision was made in cabinet. So therefore, the only way round that would be for Labour councillors, or all councillors, to ask the Labour cabinet to do that. And the next meeting in cabinet, I think, was the 6th of March, which would be before PERDA would start. But that's the only way it could happen. So,
It's less than 28 days.
Less than 28 days. So that can't happen.
It means you can't notify a key decision legally.
Right. Okay. So we'll leave it at that. So that's how that decision would make. I think what we can do as a scrutiny committee is we can say we've noted your concerns. We've noted the fact that you would like this paused. We've listened to your, to everything that's come before us tonight. And what do we actually want to say to do we want to say anything to Cabinet, or to the Labour group, or how do you want to? No, it'd be Cabinet. No, it'd just be Cabinet. So I think we just note that's how the process would happen if it was to happen. But we are not decision makers here. We just scrutinise what happens. So we can recommend, if we want to, that Cabinet looks at this again, to pause. Do we want to do that? Yes. Right, hands up for yes, so we can have a... Okay, so we've got one. Gina, Councillor Adamu, Dave Beecham, yeah. Helena? Oh, you don't vote. Councillor Berriman? Yes. Yeah, okay, so that's unanimous. So we're going to ask, a recommendation from the Adults and Health Scrutiny Panel tonight is that we ask Cabinet to pause this so that we can have the options appraisal, and then it can be done in a slightly different format. But so thank you very much tonight. Your input's been incredibly useful, and thank you very much. Now, I know it's late, but thank you ever so much for coming. Thank you. Okay, and that ends that session. Thank you. Right, we have got CQC. So we're going to be nice and brief, Margaret, because I know you've come with a very small piece of information, which is just as well, because it's been a very long evening. So Is there anything you would like to report back to us? We can ask you some brief questions, and then thank you very much for staying through this.
Yeah, I think probably the easiest way is, I think people have copies of the presentation, and in fact most of it is a general overview of CQC and what we do. The latter bit of it has just got some figures in. That's okay. No, the latter bit of the presentation has just got some figures in which do slightly differ from the ones that you had earlier, and that's only because our analysts are looking at the number of rated locations across the board in Haringey, and since some of those will have since closed, so there is a little difference to the figures that you had earlier. That's not saying those figures are wrong, it's just our analysts throw everything into the data they give me. So I don't know if it's easy if you want me to skip to those figures and look at the comparison. Yeah. I'll start there because that's looking at the number of locations in Haringey. Now, it does say 85. I appreciate that that figure is slightly different from what you would have had. But that's, as I said before, that's taking it from when the last ratings were made across all the locations in Haringey. So that's why it's slightly different. And the majority of your services are actually domiciliary care, just above residential care. And please stop. If anybody wants me to answer questions on any of the figures, I'm happy to. Currently, your care homes with nursing and without nursing, 39 without nursing, 2 with nursing. I appreciate that's quite hard to read for people, but that really is just a breakdown of how we've rated services in Haringey and where they've come out in the 5 key areas that we look at, so safe, effective, caring, responsive and well-led. I mean, I think from that I would just point out that actually most of the locations that we inspect in terms of caring, Haringey services come out pretty well, and most of them are rated as good. They tend to fall down on safe and on well-led and indeed in responsive. So there are obviously areas where improvement is needed. I did a very quick comparison. And again, I'm not expecting you to be able to read it up there, but in hopefully with your copies, a comparison against national figures. Because actually, in comparison to the national figures, Haringey isn't doing quite so well. And it's notable, there are no outstanding services in Haringey in terms of residential nursing care or domiciliary care. Doesn't mean to say that there can't be. It just means currently that there aren't. There are some inadequate services. A couple, Hoffman and Satellite, we have actually issued notices of proposal to either cancel them or to remove a location.
You said Satellite and Hoffman, did you? And can you tell me a bit more about those two?
Yeah, Hoffman is the service in Haringey is Hoffman Foundation for Autism. They have quite a number of services across London. The one in Haringey we inspected towards the end of last year and rated it inadequate. And indeed, I mean, their report has recently been published and we're in the process of taking enforcement action against them. Satellite is a domiciliary care agency. It was set up quite a few years ago, actually, as a, I was going to say as a charity. They have an ancient board of trustees, ancient in terms of years, so they set it up a long time ago with, I'm sure, exemplary reasons in mind. But actually, they haven't moved with the times, is perhaps the best way I could describe it. So again, we're looking at enforcement action against them. But in comparison to national figures, there is a way to go in that I think in all areas the Haringey services are below the national average in the areas that we inspect and across those 5 key questions. And then some of just the other figures that I pulled out is actually just to give you an idea of where we get our monitoring from. So we look at a lot of information. We look at high reporting, we look at low reporting, safeguarding, staffing levels, vacancy rates and staff turnover. I have to say that if a service has a high reporting rate, it's not necessarily bad. It really depends on their threshold for reporting incidents. So some will report everything and we'll look at them, and some underreport and we will also look at them. There have been changes. There are services in Haringey that have improved, Osborne being one of them. So the list there in green, actually, the services that have improved since their previous inspection, so their last rating has gone up. The ones in red are where the ratings have gone down, and actually Hoffman should be on that list of red. But our analysts draw information from a huge range of sources, from other stakeholders, complaints, whistleblowing, safeguarding. Services are actually required to notify us of incidents, and it's one area that we're finding, not just in Haringey actually, but it's coming up more and more across the board. Services aren't telling us of things that they should be telling us about. And that could be, of late, that's been safeguarding and DOLS notifications, actually. So notifications, so requests for DOLS and outcomes of those requests. We're finding services more and more aren't telling us when they should be telling us. And they are, as a result, starting to be fined. It's a £1,250 fine per notification that they don't tell us. It's expensive for them, so we are trying to get that message out. Please tell us. We'd rather you tell us when you don't need to than not tell us when you should. And in most cases, actually, it's just been an oversight. There's no intent to deceive at all. It's been an oversight on managers' parts. There is quite a fluid movement of managers, again, across the board in London. It's not just in Haringey. So there are services without registered managers, and I think that's had a knock-on effect on how services are being managed and the governance. Does anybody have any specific questions?
Thank you. One, about satellite. I know it was established about 20 years ago, and the idea was at the time it trained carers from ethnic minorities where they were sensitive to specific issues, you know. And I know they're still working. Can I ask, I know you said there are some concerns. Is there anything that, with the council support, they can put right, they can improve? Thank you.
I can't say what the council could give or couldn't give. That's for the council to decide. In terms of where they're at following our inspection, we are in the process of taking enforcement action. So we haven't reached the end of that process because we've served them a notice of proposal to cancel. They have the opportunity to send representations to us, and then we would have to consider them. So we're still in that process. I suppose from their perspective, there's nothing to say they can't approach the council to see whether there's anything that could be done, but that's not something that I certainly don't want to put the council on the spot and say the council has to do something, because they don't. That's for Satellite to talk to the council about, but they are quite a long way down that process. And we are looking at representations at the moment. So once we look at representations, we would then make a decision as to whether to cancel or not, depending on what they've said. And it's feasible we would go and pay another visit to them before that final decision was made.
I'd just point out that we have been working very closely with Satellite over a prolonged period. We've been working with them on systems and processes. As Margaret highlights, there are some fairly outdated practices. Been working with the board. There is recently a new chair to the board. So we've done a significant amount of work with them. I think, we are willing to support them. We've continued supporting them. I think, it's then a CQC decision in terms of the appeal and whether they feel enough has been done. But we've obviously been in talking with Councillor Vanier. We've offered significant amounts of support. I think the Board of Trustees has been in place for a very long time, probably since its inception, some of the members. And I think it's fair to say, as Margaret used the phrase, hasn't quite moved with the times, that there are some areas where they're struggling to keep up with the sort of policy and legislative framework. But we are working with them very closely. Clearly, it is, as you say, a voluntary organisation. They work have a strong cultural offer around black and minority ethnic groups. So it's not an organisation we want to see having to close, so we have been working with them very closely.
I'm going to ask a quick question on the bonds that are in the red. So because we said before if they were inquiring periods were going up and it was that 12-month sort of CQC, what about the ones in the red and the going down? How often do you inspect, or how quickly would you go back in once you know that they're in trouble?
So if we went in and rated a service as inadequate, so which are the ones that would be in red, we would go back within 6 months. It's always from the date of publication of the report, but we would go back within 6 months, unless we decided actually at the point of inspection and once we'd looked at the evidence that we needed to take urgent action. On the assumption we hadn't taken urgent action, we would go back within 6 months.
That the ones in red here they're not inadequate, they requires improvement.
Yes, sorry, I should say yes. The ones in red are ones who have gone down in ratings since they were last inspected. Of those, Satellite, and I say Hoffman should be on there, but Satellite and Hoffman are the only two who are inadequate. The rest are now requires improvement. They've gone down from good.
Okay, thank you. That was a quick whiz through on the Haringey. Does anybody else want to ask any questions? I think that was quite self-explanatory, but okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Oh.
You know your boxes up the top, your rectangles, what does that mean where you've got the arrows to various numbers and so on?
Okay, so the boxes is something that our analysts pull out from all the data that we collect. So every home, we look at the number of, for example, the level of reporting from every service, the number of safeguardings, the staffing levels, vacancy rates, turnover, and the last one actually is the food hygiene. So the arrows mean that the arrows point to services, and I know it's very tiny to read up there, where, so for example, Brownlow House, Earlham, Priscilla Wakefield and Forward Support are all services in Haringey where we're concerned at the low level of reporting. So we'd expect more. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. There's nobody's over-reporting, but we think they're possibly under-reporting, and that could just be that staff aren't aware of what they need to tell us. So it's a matter of us going in and just reinforcing what they should be telling us. So they're under-reporting. In terms of the safeguarding, Bluebird, Turkish Cypriot, Priscilla Wakefield and Spring Lane, we're getting more safeguarding from them than we would expect, but again, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad. It just means that their threshold for reporting may be at a different level. So they may be reporting everything when they don't need to. So that just skews our figures. So it's just something that inspectors would look at when they go in. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you again, Margaret, for waiting and being the last person on the agenda item. Never easy in this and adults and health, I know. So thank you very much. The last bit is just the panel. So thank you very much, all officers, for coming here tonight and your input. So just for panel, there is the CARE project that is continuing. I had an excellent meeting. I think, David, you were there. Around with Anne-Marie Gray, around looking at how NCL is looking at the workforce. So we got some really useful information from her and how she's linking in with all the Councillor Bull. So it's the next bit is we're looking to see if we can get dates for anyone from the hospice to come speak to us, potentially national bodies, but we don't think, I think that's probably going to be a phone call. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to write the report up, circulate it, it'll be a draft, so any comments gratefully received. But if we do get a hospice date, it would be great if you guys could come in. So just before we write the final report, I'd like one last meeting where I just go through it all verbally with you. You can see exactly what information we've got, what's been recommended, and then we can have a proper discussion around the table. I think those dates have been sent out, haven't they? I think Felicity sent those dates out to it, or asked people for dates. No? I was going to say long-term experience in Haringey equally qualifies. So I think actually your input would be gratefully received. So I think we're going to have one date, and I'll get Felicity to resend those dates. I don't know quite why they haven't gone round, but we're going to get dates for everyone to come in and have a last discussion before the report is written up. That would be good. So there's one date potentially for the hospice and one date for the panel to meet up. I will note the things on the work programme. Is there anything anybody wants to add to that? Okay. So I noted Councillor Berriman's about the domestic abuse, and you're right, we haven't as a panel really looked into that as part of our... I think there's been a lot of other work done by other parts of the council in violence against women particularly. But I think actually if we pick that up through the safeguarding bit and actually get them to report back in on how that's working with the children's, I think. But obviously, if anyone wants to make recommendations to the work panel, we've got one final meeting, 8th of March. So thoughts, so if you want to make any recommendations for future work for this panel, after the next administration comes in, that would be great, and we can put that on. Okay, well, thank you ever so much, everyone, for coming tonight and participating. Thank you.